Chapter 3:13. Hanjin staggered forward and threw himself on Jared's body. Blood gushed out like a fountain, nourishing Hanjin, who was almost exhausted. With his vital energy exhausted, Hanjin was so tired that he couldn't even keep his eyelids open. However, he couldn't just fall asleep like this. He had worked so hard just to absorb more energy. The dragon finally fell down. There was only one last step left. He had to persist no matter what. Hanjin lured the dragon far away, so the battle here didn't disturb the elves who were besieging the city. In fact, even if they were disturbed, the elves wouldn't be able to come to help, because Dismark was by no means a good-for-nothing. Anyone who looked down on him would taste the bitter fruit. After being harassed by Hanjin, the elves had just calmed down when a gust of gloomy air gushed out of the Holy Crown city and blew into the elves' camp. If Hanjin saw the first scene, he would immediately know what it was. Ghosts. Tens of millions of ferocious ghosts. There were no ghosts in this world, but what the necromancers created from corpses were ghosts. To be more precise, a specter had its own body and traces. It also had the ability to be almost immune to physical damage. In order to effectively attack a specter, one must use magic and doqi. In theory, a specter could kill all the ordinary people on the continent. Compared with the ferocious ghosts in Hanjin's impression, ghosts had lost their memories and were as clumsy as puppets. They had no intelligence, and their attacking methods were monotonous. Any high-level professional could kill a large number of ghosts as easily as crushing ants. But ferocious ghosts were different. Conventional attacking methods couldn't work at all. Except for Hanjin, only the priests could hurt them. Moreover, ferocious ghosts had all their memories before they died, which meant that they also had a certain level of intelligence. Hanjin killed Cromwell in isolated Cliff City. As a result, Cromwell turned into a ferocious ghost, which was very unfortunate. At that time, Hanjin's strength wasn't very strong, but when it came to catching ghosts, no one in this world could compare with him. In the end, Cromwell was thrown into the soul-devouring bead and became Harley's toy. Before the gloomy air gushed into the camp, the commander of the army, Prudence, the chief elder of the United Senate, and Lydia had already sensed that something was wrong, but they couldn't tell what it was. Gusts of bone-chilling air permeated through the campsite, and one elf after another was awakened from their sleep. They could only feel their scalps tingling and their hair standing on end, as if there was something extremely ferocious staring at them, but they couldn't see anything. In fact, it was very difficult for ferocious ghosts to cause harm to ordinary living beings. In this aspect, they were far inferior to ghosts. As long as they could maintain their composure, no matter how ferocious the ferocious ghosts were, they could only return with regret. But the elves didn't understand this. They were terrified, and even if they hugged each other, they couldn't ease the coldness that seeped into the depths of their souls. Their absent-mindedness naturally gave the ferocious ghosts an opportunity. Finally, an elf was controlled by the ferocious ghost. His sea blue eyes gradually turned light green. He suddenly grabbed the hair of his companion next to him and bit his shoulder like a mad tiger. The rest of the elves were scared out of their wits, and their minds became even more chaotic. Then, one after another, the elves became crazy and attacked their companions without reason. And this wasn't an isolated phenomenon. In every corner of the camp, the same thing was happening. The whole camp collapsed. Of course, nothing happened to Prudence and the other elves. The stronger they were, the stronger their will would be, and it was impossible for them to be controlled by the ferocious ghosts. When the situation became more and more chaotic, Prudence issued a very stupid order. He allowed the elves to freely attack their companions who had lost their minds. In fact, they only needed to knock their companions out or find a way to stall for time. When the east was bright, the chaos would disappear. But Prudence didn't understand this, and he issued the order to kill. The gates of the Holy Crown city were all opened, and Dismark personally led the army out of the city. The two sides fell into a chaotic battle. One side was undisturbed, while the other side had become a frightened bird. The result could be imagined. Prudence retreated dozens of miles with his army, while Dismark quickly retreated back to the city before the green dragon arrived. From the beginning of the siege until now, only one day and one night had passed, and the elves had suffered an unprecedented loss. However, Prudence had gathered a total of hundreds of thousands of troops. He had the strength to launch another battle, but the morale of the elves had dropped to the lowest point. The heavy losses in the siege, Han Jin's harassment, and Dismark's counterattack had left a deep shadow in the hearts of the elves. What's more, before he figured out Dismark's means, how could Prudence have the courage to launch another attack? Moreover, it was impossible for him to figure it out. Prudence was angry and frustrated, while Dismark was laughing wildly. He thought that he had the power to unify the continent, because he held an invincible trump card. However, Dismark laughed too early. If he knew the origin of Han Jin, he might have burst into tears. He was like a mouse that had gone through untold hardships and finally became a demon. He proudly drilled out of his hole, only to find a 1,000-year-old cat demon standing outside. This was purely a prank of fate. Dismark's trump card was simply a plate of sweet and delicious snacks for Han Jin. Unfortunately, Han Jin's target was the giant dragon, and temporarily missed the opportunity to eat to his heart's content, but only temporarily. Harley, on the god of war, was anxious. He was the ghost spirit of the soul-devouring orb, and he had learned some methods from Han Jin. Like Han Jin, he knew what those things were. They were tonics, excellent tonics. However, there were too many tonics. If he rashly rushed down, not only would he not gain any benefits, he might even be torn to pieces by the tonics. Moreover, he was the temporary captain of the god of war. Besides Han Jin and himself, no one else could control the god of war. If he left the god of war alone to replenish the tonics, in case something went wrong, even if the tonics did not tear him to pieces, Han Jin would come back and take his life. He was very clear that Han Jin had preserved his consciousness and what kind of favor it was. The time before dawn was the darkest. Han Jin slowly stood up. This giant dragon's strength was not as strong as the previous one. He had absorbed a total of 20 Xian's energy. This could be considered a glorious result. If he killed another giant dragon, he could use the 7 space magic crystals to create a large formation. Han Jin strode to the front of the dragon's head, waved his green aura, and slashed a dozen times. He cut open the giant dragon's skull and dug out a space magic crystal the size of a wash basin. He stored it in his space ring, and then his body sank. He needed to find a quiet place to recover his energy. The god of war was a good choice, but the sky was about to brighten. He did not know any concealment techniques. If he rashly went back, he might expose the position of the god of war. The elves had very good eyesight, and there was no lack of experts in the camp. Of course, Han Jin did not know that Dismark had already destroyed the elves' camp. Asterisk, 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 the sun rose and set, and in the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. This was one of the benefits of not being a boss. On the god of war, there were Harley, Hogan, and Dominique. In the army, there were Guevara, Lang Ning, and Majordomo Gale. He was very assured that he would not be distracted by external matters. Rising from the ground and looking at the clear blue sky, Han Jin could not help but let out a clear cry. He had a breakthrough in his state of mind, and then he received a large amount of energy. He had to admit that his luck was really good. A feeling of fullness and joy flowed through his body. This was not an emotional fluctuation, but a real state of mind. It didn't take long for Han Jin to appear near the Holy Crown City. To his surprise, the endless barracks had disappeared inexplicably, leaving only a mess on the ground. Outside the city, more than 10,000 soldiers were busy cleaning up the mess left by the elves. They had been working for 3 days, but still couldn't clean up all the things left by the elves. From time to time, a team of silver Pegasi approached and then wandered around. Dismark's soldiers seemed to be used to it. They simply ignored those elves and continued to do their own work. The elves did not launch an attack, but just stayed outside and observed. What happened? Dismark had defeated the elves' attack? Han Jin could not help but frown. According to Harley's introduction, Dismark should be at a disadvantage. Moreover, the elves had more than 10 dragons. Dismark could not win. At most, he could delay until winter came. Could it be that the elves took the initiative to retreat? Did prudence want to lure Dismark out of the Holy Crown City? During the time when Hanjin was observing, a team of Pegasi soldiers had found Hanjin on the hill and accelerated to this place. Hanjin did not want to have a conflict with those elves. Although he hated them to the core, it did not mean that he would kill them one by one. After a moment, Hanjin appeared in a dead alley in the Holy Crown City. Taking off his blood-stained robe, Hanjin put on a brand new white magic robe and slowly walked out of the alley. The Holy Crown City was a rich city with a large population. The streets were full of shops and pedestrians, and most of them looked happy. Hanjin mixed in the crowd, walking and looking around. Suddenly, there was a commotion in front of him. The pedestrians all stopped, including Hanjin. Not long after, a team of soldiers escorting hundreds of elves came over. Because they had captured so many elves, the alchemists in the city didn't have enough time to make so many shackles. The ones in their inventory had long been used up, so Dismark soldiers used a cruel and barbaric method. They directly cut off the elves' wrists and shoulders. Without their hands, the elves lost their ability to fight. The soldiers also used a long rope to tie one of the elves' legs together, making it impossible for them to escape. The wounds were treated with alchemy potions, and the veins had a chance to heal. However, the elves could no longer lift heavy objects. In most cases, the elven prisoners of war were only used for one purpose, which was to be used as sex slaves. Not only humans liked them, but other races also liked them. After all, everyone loved beauty. The elven prisoners were getting closer and closer. All of them were in ragged clothes, and all of them had dull eyes, which was a sharp contrast to the pedestrians on both sides. The wounds on their shoulders and wrists had just scabbed, so they staggered as they walked. If an elf walked slowly and slowed down the whole team, the soldiers would mercilessly lash him with their whips. Compared to Zagund, Dismark's rule was very lax. The pedestrians on both sides were not afraid of the soldiers, and were even talking with great interest. A few children came out of the crowd and threw stones at the elves. The crowd roared with laughter. The adults did not care, and neither did the soldiers. They were all laughing and watching the fun. A big man stepped forward and whispered a few words into the children's ears. The group of children screamed and rushed over, grabbing a female elf's robe and tearing it apart. The robe was already in tatters, and it was torn apart in a few moments. Then, the children turned their attention to the muslin dress. The elf anxiously dodged left and right, but her arms were not under her control. There were also small hands jumping around her, so she could not dodge. With a rip, the muslin dress was also torn apart. The elf was very anxious. She lifted her only mobile foot and kicked a child to the ground. In fact, she also knew her situation. She was afraid of provoking the anger of the soldiers, so she did not use any strength at all. However, she kicked a child after all. The child felt that he had been wronged and sat there crying loudly. The soldiers in charge of escorting the captives were furious. They surrounded the elf and whipped her hard. The elf screamed a few times, lost her balance, and fell to the ground. However, the soldiers did not let her go and continued to whip her. Seeing the miserable state of their companion, the rest of the elves were angry and rushed over. At this moment, a loud shout was heard. "What are you doing?" Following the shout, more than 10 knights rushed over from the other end of the long street. The leading knight was wearing a black heavy armor that covered his entire body and face. There was no way to see his face. In his right hand was a black and red war spear. Hanjin recognized him. He was Dismark's #1 warrior, the Bloody Knight Gerald. When Hanjin saw Gerald for the first time, Gerald was a powerful being that he could only look up to. He, Morrison's, and the Dark Elves led by Hazel did not dare to attack him. However, at this moment, Hanjin might be able to kill Gerald in one move. In less than 3 years, Hanjin's strength had become so powerful that it could only be described as rapid progress. General, the soldiers in charge of escorting the captives hurriedly knelt on the ground. Gerald looked down and said coldly, "What's the matter?" His voice was very strange. It sounded like metal screaming, hoarse and sharp. It gave people an indescribable feeling. "General, this elf attacked our civilians." A soldier mustered up his courage and replied. Gerald glanced at the child. The child had stopped crying long ago. The name of the Bloody Night could not only stop children from crying at night, but also during the day. "Let her get up and continue walking. Don't waste time." Gerald waved his hand. "Yes, General." The soldier replied as he reached out and grabbed the elf's hair, trying to lift her up. The pitiful elf had suffered countless whips and kicks. She was already on the verge of fainting. As soon as the soldier let go, she softly fell to the ground. Gerald frowned. The black and red war spear in his hand pierced out like lightning and pierced the elf's knee. Blood splattered. The elf's leg was severed from a knee as if it had been cut by a knife. She let out a miserable scream and then fainted. The children cried out and scattered. The child sitting on the ground also squeezed into the crowd. The big man who came up with the idea shrunk back timidly. In fact, he only wanted to feast his eyes. Gerald's methods were too extreme and not something that ordinary people could appreciate. "Continue walking." Gerald put away his war spear. The soldiers drove the captive forward. Half of the bloody leg was still tied to the rope and followed the elves. The commotion among the elves also disappeared miraculously. They knew what kind of person Gerald was. If they delayed any longer, perhaps Gerald would kill them all. Han Jin quietly watched the scene in front of him. There was no ripple in his heart. If those messy things didn't happen, if Sunir was still by his side, he would have already taken action. Even if he couldn't save the elves, he could at least punish the criminals. In isolated Cliff City, he and Sunir had done many such things. Sunir was his wife, and the elves were undoubtedly his family. Of course, he would help them. However, the elves' attitude and actions had completely and irreparably hurt him. In his eyes, every elf was so detestable. Even if Dismark could be kind, the elves would die in his hands sooner or later. His indifference was completely the result of the elves' own actions. Gerald was just about to urge his horse to move when his eyes suddenly stopped on Han Jin. No wonder. Han Jin's appearance and temperament were too outstanding. Compared to the timid and slightly fearful expressions of the pedestrians, his cold and indifferent attitude was particularly eye-catching. Gerald suddenly jumped off his horse and strode in front of Han Jin. He scanned Han Jin from head to toe and said coldly, "Magician, why can't I sense your magic power?" Han Jin didn't expect Gerald to come to him. He felt a little helpless and a little amused. He glanced at Gerald and turned to walk to the side. "Wait!" Gerald stretched out his war spear and blocked Han Jin's way. "Who are you?" "I'm just a traveler," Han Jin said softly. "Don't bother me." The first sentence could barely be considered an explanation, but the second sentence was full of provocation and hard to accept. In fact, Han Jin was only warning Gerald. In his opinion, it was very natural. If he didn't want to sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight, and if he didn't think that Dismark would be at a disadvantage, he wouldn't have backed away. Gerald was furious and released his combat power. The surrounding people scattered to the sides and looked at Han Jin as if they were looking at a dead man. Han Jin suddenly turned his head and looked at Gerald with a slightly mocking smile. From not wanting to kill, to being forced to kill, to taking the initiative to kill, this was a cruel growth. If Gerald didn't know what was good for him, he wouldn't mind taking his life immediately. Hatred, pain, and power. These three could easily make people lose their sense of direction, and Han Jin had all of them. If Guevara and the others were here and understood Han Jin's current state of mind, they would also feel that Han Jin was a stranger. Gerald suddenly remembered something and lowered his war spear bit by bit. Han Jin ignored Gerald and walked away step by step. Chapter 314. After all, there were only a limited number of real powerhouses. Gerald had already released his fighting spirit, but Han Jin still ignored him. Intuitively, Gerald judged that Han Jin's strength must be much stronger than his, plus the age and race. The answer was obvious. Therefore, Gerald did not dare to stop him, nor did he dare to send people to follow him. He turned his horse around and ran back as fast as he could. Hanjin walked forward slowly. He really didn't care. With the earth meld, the earth shrinking spell, and the faked earth corpse, he didn't think that anyone could stop him. Even if Nicholas, who was at the level of Sword Sage, appeared here, he could still escape safely. Although the world was big and there were many powerhouses, he was a unique self-cultivator. With enough support, even if there was a mountain of knives and a sea of fire in front of him, he could still handle it with ease. However, today he was doomed not to see the whole picture of the Holy Crown City. Just when he passed the crossroad, he saw a dozen magicians riding horses in front of him. They were talking loudly all the way, and the magician in front was Cain. Hanjin saw Cain, and Cain also saw Hanjin. He was stunned for a moment, turned back, and said something to the magicians behind him. Then he waved goodbye and walked to another street. Hanjin also walked to that street and slowly followed Cain. Cain slowed down. After about 700 or 800 meters, he suddenly jumped down and led the horse into a courtyard. Hanjin didn't stop, but continued to walk forward. After another 500 meters, he turned into a bar. Dismark had already told the whole city about the victory, so the bar was full of a festive atmosphere. Although it was daytime, the bar was full of guests. Most of them were drinking and laughing. Compared to the bars in the underground city, this place was much more civilized. Of course, prostitutes were indispensable. There were some who dilly-dallying and stingy actions, but the prostitutes would never do it in front of others. This was their last shred of shame, their last shred of dignity. If they had no bottom line, they would be hopeless. Hanjin was looking for a seat when a prostitute, who seemed to have drunk too much, staggered to Hanjin. A pretty boy like Hanjin was very popular in most places, and prostitutes also liked to be beautiful. Before Hanjin spoke, the prostitute leaned on Hanjin, rubbing her towering breasts on Hanjin's body. A pair of smart big eyes blinked several times, sending a look at Hanjin. Hanjin grabbed the prostitute's wrist and gave her a gentle push. The prostitute couldn't help but take a few steps back, bumping into the back of a soldier. The soldier's long sword poked the prostitute's waist neither lightly nor heavily, and the prostitute screamed in pain. The guests all looked over. Seeing that he had attracted enough attention, Hanjin took out a gold coin and flicked it. The coin drew an arc in the air and flew straight to the prostitute. Although the prostitute was not a professional, she was very agile. She immediately smiled through her tears and reached out her white hand, catching the coin accurately. Hanjin slowly sank into the ground in front of everyone's eyes. A moment later, Hanjin appeared in the courtyard and opened the door. Cain was already waiting inside. Seeing Hanjin, he greeted him with surprise and joy. "Raphael, why are you here?" "Just looking around." Hanjin closed the door. "Why are you with those magicians?" At that time, the situation in the Holy Crown City was very critical. Dismark had issued a conscription order. As a 9th-grade magician, of course, they wouldn't let me go. Cain shrugged his shoulders helplessly. "Gibran and Julia weren't with you? They have been hiding in the basement," Cain said and pointed to the inner room. "Hiding from what?" Hanjin didn't understand for a moment. "Julia is an elf. If she was found, the people in the city would never let her go." Cain smiled bitterly. "Oh." Hanjin nodded. "You didn't tell him I was here?" No. Cain's face slightly changed. "Raphael, the people in the city said that the elves have occupied the Bite Man. Is it true?" "Yes." "Those damn bastards," Cain said bitterly. After hearing the news, Julia's mood has been very unstable. "Alas, I don't know how to tell you." "It's okay." Hanjin smiled. "They can't occupy it for long. Sooner or later, they will leave." "Raphael, you don't blame Julia, do you?" "Why would I blame her?" Hanjin's face became serious. "This has nothing to do with her, and she has no power to influence the decision of the Wild Willow City Senate." "That's good." Cain let out a long sigh. "You didn't tell them I was here because you were worried about me," Hanjin said with a faint smile. "Raphael, you don't know Julia's mood. Alas, she always said that she would never have the face to see you again." Cain said in a low voice. "Wait a minute, I'll go find them." "No need, I'll leave in a bit. Don't disturb them." Hanjin shook his head. "Right, Cain, didn't the elves already have the advantage?" Why are they retreating for no reason? I wasn't on the city wall that day, but I sensed a very strange aura surging out of the city. Then, the elven camp became a mess. Cain muttered. Then, Dismark led all the troops out. The elves couldn't organize any effective resistance and were beaten back. If the elves didn't send over a dozen giant dragons to support them, Dismark would have won a great victory. A dozen giant dragons? That means Dismark's losses weren't small. Dismark's losses weren't big. On the contrary, he even captured a giant dragon. How is that possible? Hanjin couldn't help but frown. He had to use all his skills to barely defeat a giant dragon. If Dismark could block the attack of a dozen giant dragons, then his strength was simply unimaginable. Raphael, you underestimate the combat power of Dismark's Magic Legion, Cain said with a smile. Although the Magic Legion lacks high-grade professionals, including me, there are only 3 great magicians. But the strength of the magicians below is very average. Most of them are real magicians, and there are dozens of warlocks and sages. Hundreds of magicians release magic at the same time. That scene can even be described as overwhelming. No matter how strong the giant dragons are, they wouldn't dare to break into the magic barrage. Actually, it's my first time seeing the Magic Legion in action. Spectacular, really spectacular. I still can't believe it. Hanjin shook his head. 20 years ago, when the Silver Pegasus Legion of Wild Willow City was attacked by the giant dragons, they couldn't resist at all and collapsed. Dismark's Magic Legion only had a few hundred magicians. How could they compare to tens of thousands of Pegasus warriors? Because the Silver Pegasus Legion of Wild Willow City didn't have a super-grade creature to fight against the giant dragons, Cain said. Even if the situation was so bad, didn't the elves still kill a red dragon? Super-grade creature? You're saying that Dismark has a super-grade creature? Raphael, we all underestimated Dismark's strength. Who would have thought that he could summon an angel? Cain said word by word. I heard from Knight Gavara that in the war 20 years ago, Dismark set up an altar and prayed for the grace of the god of light. In the end, he succeeded in summoning an angel. Now it seems that Dismark was just deliberately mystifying. The key was his knight's shield. Tell me more about it. The elven dragons came too quickly. Dismark didn't have time to prepare. In order to protect his army, he could only tear off his previous disguise. Cain said. At that time, the holy light emitted from his knight's shield covered the entire battlefield. Then, a huge gate of heaven appeared in the sky. Raphael, do you know what Dismark summoned? It was an angel of light. An angel of light whose strength was far greater than an upper Valkyrie. Hanjin's expression was very serious, but he didn't interrupt. He only listened carefully to Cain's description. With the protection of an angel of light, the Magic Legion could release magic without any worries. Otherwise, Dismark wouldn't have retreated back to the city so easily. Cain sighed. Dismark, that guy, he's really scheming. Raphael, did you notice Gerald's knight's shield? The style is almost exactly the same as Dismark's knight's shield. Many knights also wear the same knight's shield. Dismark did this to hide his treasure. Unfortunately, everyone knows about it now. Know what? Hanjin asked. Only holy armors can summon angels. So, Dismark's knight's shield must be an ancient artifact, the Lion King's shield. Cain laughed. If Jedis hears this news, he might be overjoyed. What does this have to do with Jedis? The holy crown that the Vatican lost is the Oracle crown. Like the Lion King's shield, it's a set of holy armors, Cain said. There's also the prophet's sword, the glorious pendant, the saint's boots, and the light armor. With these 6 ancient artifacts, holy armors will once again appear on the continent. Raphael, maybe you don't know the power of holy armors. Let's put it this way. If an ordinary warrior has holy armors, his fighting power will be even more terrible than a top powerhouse. Moreover, holy armors can summon 6 angels of light to help him in battle. Who could be his opponent? That Nicholas, even if he's really a demigod, he can't fight against 6 angels of light at the same time. Holy armors. Han Jin muttered to himself. Now it's Dismark's turn to have a headache. Haha, who told him to expose himself? What? Dismark found a few helpers from the Church of Light. There's a Saint Knight and a group of hundreds of priests. But they didn't intervene in the battle a few days ago. Cain laughed. That's the Lion King's shield. How can they not be greedy? The Church of Light is very cohesive. If they want to do something together. Saint Knight. Han Jin never thought that so many things had happened in the Holy Crown City. Shocking news came one after another. Yes, Cain said. At this moment, a sound suddenly came from the inner room. Han Jin was stunned, then nodded to Cain and turned to go out. Cain grabbed his arm and said in a low voice in a pleading tone, Raphael, can you please see Julia? Han Jin smiled bitterly. He didn't want to see Julia because he didn't know what to say or what kind of attitude he should have. He hated elves, but he couldn't hate a companion who had gone through thick and thin with him. Besides, Edwina had died in front of him, causing Julia to lose her sister forever. So he had always felt sorry for Julia and really couldn't hate her. Okay, Cain begged again. Han Jin nodded helplessly and slowly turned around. The inner room's door opened, and Julia walked out with her head down. Gibran followed closely behind her. In just over a month, Julia's appearance had changed dramatically. Her long hair had lost its luster and was draped over her shoulders. Her cheeks had sunken deeply, and her beautiful eyes were bigger, but they were dull and lifeless. The sudden attack of the elves made Han Jin and Julia suffer, and her life was much more difficult than Han Jin's. Whether it was revenge or something else, at least Han Jin had a decision and a goal. Julia, however, was still living in confusion. She could only pray in the dark basement for a miracle. Yes, she was born in Wild Willow City, but her heart had already been given to Gibran. As the saying went, my home is where my heart is at peace. Only Gibran could make her feel at ease. So wherever Gibran went, that would be her second home. How could she give up on a relationship that they had gone through life and death together? Also, Han Jin had never shown any hostility towards Wild Willow City. It was Wild Willow City who had suddenly pulled out their butcher's knife. After wandering outside for so long, Julia had her own sense of right and wrong. She wouldn't be influenced by anything. So, she was in pain. After taking 2 steps, Julia suddenly felt something. She raised her head and saw Han Jin. Her body froze. Raphael, what? Don't you recognize me? Han Jin smiled. Julia took a deep breath. Wild Willow City really took over the bite, man. Julia still had a trace of hope in her heart. This was the miracle she had been praying for. Han Jin pondered for a moment, then slowly nodded. Julia's body leaned back weakly. Fortunately, Gibran was quick to react and supported her. Julia's lips were trembling. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't say it. The atmosphere was very quiet. Han Jin didn't know what he should say either. Gibran and Cain's expressions were very sad. They were able to walk together with Han Jin, not only because of Han Jin, but also because they wanted to make a name for themselves. However, the betrayal of the elves forced them to the edge of a cliff. So you're saying, Julia looked at Han Jin in a daze. We'll be enemies from now on? Gibran and Cain's gazes immediately fell on Han Jin. They nervously waited for Han Jin's reply. Han Jin was the leader of the entire corporation. His attitude determined everyone's attitude towards Julia. If Han Jin really treated Julia as an enemy, then Julia would be excluded from the group forever. This also meant that Gibran and Julia would have no future unless they could hide somewhere and live in seclusion. Julia, are you kidding? Han Jin's expression was very serious. We're partners. Don't comfort me. Julia smiled bitterly. I see helplessness in your eyes. I'm just helpless towards the stupidity and short-sightedness of the elders of Wild Willow City. Han Jin said softly, Don't worry, Julia. I'll take care of this problem. Give me some time. I'll make the elders of Wild Willow City understand that cooperating with us is the best choice. You believe in me. Han Jin's tone was very firm. In reality, his explanation and promise were weak and powerless. Logically speaking, the experienced Julia shouldn't believe such nonsense at all. However, Julia had been immersed in conflict and pain these past few days. She was mentally and physically exhausted. She really needed a guarantee. Even if it was a lie full of loopholes, she was willing to believe it. Not only was Han Jin lying to her, even she was lying to herself. Really? Julia asked in a trembling voice. A faint smile appeared on Han Jin's face. In the past, no matter what kind of hardships he faced, he would always smile like this, and his companions would always gain confidence from his smile. As it turned out, Han Jin had never lost before. Julia raised her hands little by little. Then, she covered her face and let out a faint sob. Gibran patted Julia's back and changed the topic. Raphael, how's the underground city? It's all over, Han Jin said softly. It's all over? Gibran revealed a surprised expression. Yes, Zagund is dead, Alquid is dead, and the 7 brothers are dead too. Han Jin smiled. Including all the Abyss warriors in the underground city, none of them escaped. How? How was this possible? Although this was great news, Gibran still couldn't believe it. Putting Zaganite aside, Alquid was a powerhouse at the peak of level 12, while Wape and his brothers were abyssal demons. Even if they couldn't defeat them, they should be able to escape, right? Raphael has made his move. What else is impossible? Cain laughed. Julia raised her head and revealed a look of surprise and joy. According to Gavar's original plan, it was already very difficult to eliminate Zagund before the arrival of spring next year. Now, the real winter had not yet arrived, but all the abyssal powerhouses who posed a great threat to everyone were killed. This was beyond her imagination. Perhaps Raphael's strength was stronger than before. Otherwise, there was no suitable reason. Thinking of this, the last doubt in Julia's heart disappeared. She believed that Han Jin really had the ability to solve the problem in Wild Willow City. Then, our next target should be the Holy Crown City, right? Cain said. Why do you say so? Han Jin laughed. Because Sunir is in Wild Willow City. You won't do anything to hurt her, right? Cain said in an affirmative tone. Sunir? Han Jin felt a sharp pain in his heart. Then, he nodded as if nothing had happened. Of course, let's deal with Dismark first. Chapter 315. Raphael, it won't be easy to kill Dismark, Cain said. Dismark is a supreme knight himself and is very powerful. After activating the Lion King's shield, his combat ability became even more terrifying. He also found 3 holy knights to help him, and I have a feeling that there's a strong person hiding by Dismark's side. Otherwise, there's no way to explain why the elven camped suddenly. Ahem. Han Jin suddenly coughed dryly. Cain immediately reacted and hurriedly shut his mouth. What happened to the elven camp? Julia asked. She had already heard it. The mysterious strong person by Dismark's side used some unknown method to cause chaos in the elven camp. Then, Dismark led the army and killed his way out. Fortunately, the elven commander is very experienced. He adjusted the deployment in time and repelled Dismark's attack, Cain explained. Cain didn't dare to tell the truth. If Julia knew that Dismark had captured tens of thousands of elves, who knew what she would do? It was one thing to feel guilty about the sudden betrayal of the elves, but it was another thing to sit back and watch as countless elves suffered. Didn't you just say that the 3 holy knights didn't participate in the battle? Obviously, they won't obey Dismark's orders. Han Jin changed the topic. Then he thought of something. Cain, do you know the names of the 3 holy knights? I do. Cain nodded. The old man is called Adonis. The middle-aged knight is called Odo, and the youngest holy knight is called Ami J. What? Han Jin was stunned. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. I even chatted with them. Raphael, what's wrong? I know them. Han Jin smiled. When Jed's introduced the internal structure of the Vatican to him, the 2 of them had been talking alone, so only he knew. Really? Yes. Han Jin nodded and said, they are the commanders of the Radiant Knight Corps. The last time I accepted Jed's request to go to the southwest region of the continent, it was to find them. Although I don't know why they are here, things have become very simple. Let Jedis make contact with them. Do you think they will still help Dismark? Great. But, Raphael, don't forget about that mysterious powerhouse and the Magic Legion, said Kane, rubbing his hands excitedly. Did you find anything noteworthy? No. I've only joined the Magic Legion for a short period of time. Dismark won't trust me at all. I'm just relying on my intuition to think that there should be such a powerhouse. This won't change anything. Hanjin pondered for a moment, then smiled faintly. I can deal with Dismark, Guevara, Jeds, Majordomo Gale, and Dominique. The four of them should be more than enough to deal with that mysterious guy, right? The Magic Legion. Leave it to the 3 Paladin Knight Corps and the Priest Corps. You and Yelena can assist them. No matter what, Dismark is doomed this time. What Hanjin said made sense. Although this was Dismark's territory, Hanjin's high-end power was far above Dismark's. The 3 Paladin Knight Corps and the Priest Corps could also act as spies. After all, Dismark had no chance of winning. Let's talk about the Magic Legion. Hanjin said slowly. Kane, if you and Gibran suddenly attack, can you take care of those 2 Supreme Sorcerers? I could take care of Legion Commander Sandy, but that guy called Woodrow is a 10th grade Supreme Sorcerer. I'm worried that Gibran. In fact, Kane's utilitarian heart was not as strong as it was now. After joining the Magic Legion, his ambitions sprouted little by little because Legion Commander Sandy was also a Fire Supreme Sorcerer. Although they were both at the 9th grade, Kane's strength was slightly stronger than his. Therefore, Kane thought that the days in isolated Cliff City, where he had to rely on hunting magic beasts for a living, were too unfair. No matter how famous he was in the mercenary world, it was far less than the power and benefits of a Legion commander. Woodrow? No way. Raphael? You know that old guy? Kane asked in surprise. Ah, an old friend. Woodrow used to be the chief magistrate of Bite City. Later, he was driven out of the Bite Man kingdom and fled to the territory of Black Raven City. He gathered his defeated soldiers and wanted to fight against Lang Ning, but was defeated by Lang Ning in the end. So it's him. Kane suddenly understood. He knew that Han Jin's Black Raven City had been attacked by 2 forces, but he didn't know the details. After Han Jin's reminder, he suddenly understood. It seems that, after being defeated by Lang Ning, he ran to the Holy Crown City to seek refuge with Dismark. Han Jin smiled. Very good, very good. I could take care of them all at once. He's much stronger than me. Kane pondered. However, although he didn't gain Dismark's trust, Sandy has always been afraid of him. Maybe I can find a way here. Don't worry. Han Jin said, I'll go back and find Guevara and ask them to come up with a suitable plan. I'm not good at this. Okay, then I'll wait for your news. Kane nodded. Han Jin's eyes fell on Julia. Julia, don't think too much. You must take care of yourself these days. Leave the rest to us. Julia looked at Han Jin with grateful eyes and replied softly, Okay. Han Jin winked at Kane. Then I'll go back first. You must be careful. Okay. Gibran forced a smile. Kane understood and followed Han Jin to the courtyard. Han Jin looked at the closed door and whispered, There are some things that you shouldn't let Julia know. I understand. Kane lowered his voice as much as he could. Gibran, find a time to talk to him. He doesn't have to do anything. Just look after Julia. Han Jin said slowly, Tell him that this is my idea. Okay. You'd better set up a magic array above the basement to block the fluctuations outside. This way, Julia won't know what's going on outside. But how long can we hide it? Let's hide it for as long as we can. Han Jin reached out and patted Kane's shoulder, and his body sank down. Asterisk, 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 unhindered Taoism provided Han Jin with a lot of convenience. It also allowed the entire group centered around Han Jin to gain a lot of visible and invisible advantages. If it were someone else, it might take a few months to pass the information to the High Command deep underground, and then the High Command would come up with a plan and then bring the plan back. It was very likely that the opportunity would slip away with the passage of time. By then, it was unknown whether the plan would still be useful. However, it only took Han Jin a few hours to find a Riptide regiment. He summoned Guevara and the others, and told them all the information he had in his possession. Jed's was, of course, the most agitated. This archbishop, who had always been calm and indifferent, finally showed his fragile side. He even wanted to leave the camp immediately and look for the three holy night. Han Jin, on the other hand, was very lazy. After explaining the situation clearly, he let Guevara and the others leave his tent. As for what kind of plan Guevara and the others would come up with for the current situation, he didn't care at all, but did he want to ask? This kind of attitude was a matter of opinion. Perhaps some people secretly thought that Han Jin wasn't like a leader, but in a deeper sense, it might be a kind of wisdom. In terms of military strategy and so on, Han Jin definitely couldn't compare to Guevara, Jed's, Majordomo Gale, and the others. He couldn't even compare to Lang Ning. Was there really a need to criticize him? Of course. Han Jin should study seriously and think of ways to improve himself. But after all, a person's energy was limited. He tried his best to spend all the time he could on training. If he didn't train, why would he study strategy? Was that smart or stupid? From another point of view, it was Han Jin's luck to be with such outstanding people as Guevara, Jed's, Majordomo Gale, and so on. But if he didn't use it and force himself to stand out, what was the point of being lucky? It was too wasteful. Han Jin sat there without moving. He had said everything he needed to say, but he still kept the news that Sunir was married in his heart. First, he didn't want to be comforted, and second, he didn't want others to worry about him. After an unknown amount of time, Han Jin took out the robe, stained with dragon blood from the space ring, and stroked it with his fingers. Although the magic robe was very free and easy to wear, it was too loose and not suitable for close combat. So, the robe that Han Jin wore was mostly changed by Sunir. Now, the robe was still there, but the person was no longer the same. Han Jin held the robe and stared at it for a long time. Suddenly, his fingers loosened and the robe fell to the ground. Then, a ball of flame floated over and set the robe ablaze. At this moment, Yelena suddenly walked in from outside and saw the fire on the ground. She asked in surprise, "Raphael, what are you doing?" Han Jin didn't say anything. He stood up, took off his robe, and threw it into the fire. "Raphael, what's wrong with you?" Yelena's eyes widened. "It's dirty," Han Jin said indifferently. "Want to be clean if you wash it?" "Yelena, help me find a few female slaves who know how to sew." Han Jin didn't want to waste his breath on this issue. Burning the two robes looked like a child throwing a tantrum, but in fact, Han Jin needed to do something. Using this as a medium, he could be sad, he could be in pain, and he could vent. From now on, he would face the memories that made him feel warm or sad with a calm attitude. What happened? Yelena still didn't give up. "Forget it, I'll find them myself." Han Jin slowly walked out of the tent. Yelena grabbed Han Jin's arm. "Tell me, what happened?" "Nothing happened. I don't believe you," Yelena said very seriously. If it were Guevara and the others, they would never try to pry into Han Jin's privacy. If Han Jin was willing to talk, they would be a good listener. If Han Jin didn't want to talk, they wouldn't force him. If it were Morrison's and the others, perhaps they would obediently step aside if Han Jin gave them a look. Only Yelena could force and act shamelessly, which was a girl's capital. Han Jin was amused. "What do you want to know? Give me a hint, and I'll satisfy you." Yelena's eyes fell on the ashes that were still flickering with sparks. "Is it Sunir?" It wasn't that Yelena had shocking intuition, but she had a guilty conscience. When she saw Han Jin's abnormal behavior, she naturally thought of Sunir. "This has nothing to do with her," Han Jin said softly. "It really has nothing to do with her. Actually, you don't have to think too much." Yelena was flustered and avoided Han Jin's gaze. "Really, Sunir will definitely come back." Yelena didn't mean what she said. She hoped that Han Jin and Sunir's relationship would break up, but she didn't want to hurt Han Jin or Sunir. After all, she and Sunir were very good friends during that time of adventure. This was also the fault of Grand Duke Solomon's teaching methods. He only let Yelena focus on magic. In other aspects, Yelena was almost a blank sheet of paper. She even absurdly thought that friendship was as important as national affairs. Otherwise, Yelena's attitude would be much more natural than it was now, or she would have already started to sow discord. As for whether her little tricks could be hidden from Han Jin and the others, that was another matter. Come back. Hanjin paused and said indifferently, "It doesn't mean anything to me. Sunir is not the Sunir of the past, and I am not the same person as before." "How can you?" Yelena said in surprise. "No way. Your relationship is so good. It can't be. You say that because you don't know what I've done." Hanjin smiled. "She won't forgive me, and I won't forgive anyone either." Hanjin couldn't help but think of the countless elves who died tragically under his sword that night, but he didn't regret it. If there was a button in his hand that could blow up all the elves by pressing it, he wouldn't hesitate to press it. It was the elves who launched the attack first and occupied his territory. His relationship with the elves had become irreconcilable enemies. It didn't seem difficult to choose whether to compromise and save a relationship that was flawed and regretful, or to be more decisive and do his best to protect all those who were willing to stand by his side. If he let a few elves go, they might bring harm to his subordinates. He had no obligation to the former, but he had an unshirkable responsibility for the latter. Did he have to wait until Riptide was surrounded by the elves and watch his loyal soldiers fall into a pool of blood one after another? Did he have enough reason to be ruthless? Wasn't it too late? If he did this, he would be able to face Sunir, but how could he face the thousands of followers outside? He was facing a war, not a game. If he was soft-hearted and hesitant, he might be able to turn thousands of soldiers who shouldn't have died into white bones. Moreover, he was in a disadvantageous position, so what right did he have to forgive the enemy? What did you do?" Yelena asked anxiously. Hanjin didn't want to talk anymore. He reached out to push Yelena's hand away, but Yelena's attitude was unusually firm. She held on to Hanjin's arm with both hands and refused to let go. Hanjin couldn't force Yelena's fingers away. The two of them looked at each other, and the atmosphere became a little awkward. "You really can't tell me? We're friends." After looking at each other for a moment, Yelena hurriedly avoided Hanjin's gaze. Hanjin suddenly felt irritated. He had noticed some time ago that Yelena's attitude towards him was a little ambiguous. He didn't want to accept anything and was disgusted by her taking advantage of his weakness. However, as Yelena said, they were friends who had gone through thick and thin together. He could refuse, but he couldn't hurt Yelena. Just as Hanjin was thinking about whether he should say it out loud, the curtain was lifted and Jeds walked in. When he saw Hanjin and Yelena, he couldn't help but laugh. "You two are?" Yelena's face suddenly turned red. She let go of her hand and ran out in a panic. Hanjin secretly sighed. "Jeds, what's the matter? This is a good way to divert attention and make it easier for you to forget the past." Jed smiled. "Don't talk nonsense. It's not what you think." Hanjin shook his head. "Haha. I didn't want to get involved, but since things have come to this point, I think it's time for me to say it out loud," Jed said softly. "What do you want to say?" Hanjin frowned slightly. "Do you know who the elves hate the most?" "Me? No, it's Night Gavara." Jeds pondered for a moment. In isolated Cliff City, the great elf Lydia once attacked Night Gavara. It was always convenient for smart people to talk. Jeds didn't need to explain the cause and effect. Hanjin had already guessed a lot from this introduction. After a long silence, Hanjin slowly said, "When did this happen?" "Gavara just arrived in isolated Cliff City not long ago." "You both know?" "Yes." Jeds nodded. "Night Gavara didn't tell you because he didn't want to cause trouble for you. Major Domo Gale didn't tell you because he didn't want you to misunderstand him. Since they can't tell you, I'm the only one who can." "Understand?" Hanjin said word by word. He really did understand. What Jeds expressed was not only information, but also his position. Hanjin's think tank headed by Gavara had a transcendent position. They were now formulating a plan to attack the Holy Crown City. After occupying the Holy Crown City, their next opponent would be the elves. Jed's choice to reveal the past at this time was enough to prove that the think tank had reached an agreement on how to fight back against the elves. Chapter 316. Sir, you should also know that if a great mage like us were to clash with a ranger of the same rank, who would win or lose? Luck plays a large part in it. Kane smiled bitterly. Unfortunately, My luck has always been very bad, so I need an assistant. I don't need a lot. Sir, just send a small team of mages to help me, and I have 100% confidence in killing him. This is a bit difficult, Sandy muttered. Sir Dismark has always treated mages as treasures. If the loss is too great, I won't be able to explain it to him. Loss. Sir, in your eyes, am I Cain a waste? Sandy was still muttering to himself. In fact, he had already decided to help Cain. As long as he could gain Cain's friendship, even if he really lost a small team of mages, it was not a big deal. But he couldn't agree to Cain's request too quickly. At least, he had to let Cain understand his difficulties. Seeing that Sandy did not respond, Cain helplessly sighed, showing a dispirited look. He seemed very disappointed. Okay, I promise you. Sandy finally opened his golden mouth. Really? Cain was stunned and immediately cried out excitedly. We are friends. Of course I will help if I can. Although this makes me... Sir, thank you so much. Cain suddenly stood up. From now on, if there is anything you need me for, please don't hesitate to ask. Ha! Sandy smiled and waved his hand. When do you want the transfer order? Now, Cain said. Tomorrow he will leave the city. I have to make some preparations as soon as possible. Cain, you don't want to do in the city, do you? That won't do. Sandy seemed a little nervous. If you cause trouble in the city, I won't be able to suppress it. Gerald is not easy to talk to. He will definitely report to Sir Dismark. You can rest assured, sir. How could I be so impulsive? I have waited for several years. One more day won't make a difference. Is that so? It's good that you can stay awake. Sandy nodded and then took out a blank document from his spatial ring. He also took out a bottle of potion. There was no pen here, so he dipped his finger in the potion and started writing on the document. Finally, he took out a magic seal and imprinted it on the document. Sandy handed the written transfer order to Cain and said with a smile, What I'm giving you is an elite team. With your strength, dealing with a ranger of the 9th step shouldn't be a problem. Cain took the transfer order and looked at it carefully before putting it into his spatial ring. Thank you, sir. Goodbye. Sandy opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but at this moment, a black dagger suddenly appeared and pierced the back of Sandy's head. The human skull is extremely hard, but in front of the dagger, it was as soft as bread. Sandy's body trembled and slid under the chair. Cain stood up and strode outside. He had to return to the Magic Legion as soon as possible. Woodrow and Sandy were both dead, and he was the only Archmage left. With Sandy's transfer order, he was qualified to be the temporary commander. Gerald was sitting in his tent, silently wiping the spear in his hand. Although he was the second most powerful person in the Holy Crown City, Gerald's character was a bit of a loner. He didn't like to communicate with others and didn't have any friends. Because his means were too cruel and he gave people a feeling of moodiness, no one wanted to be friends with him. Of course, he didn't want to make friends with anyone. Compared to other people, he was more willing to believe in the spear in his hand, because the spear would never betray him. Suddenly, Gerald sensed something. He hurriedly stood up and rushed out of the tent. Under the moonlight and the stars, one could clearly see the straight street in front of the barracks. At the other end of the street, a tall figure was quickly approaching the barracks. The figure was about 3 meters tall. He was covered in a light, cyan-heavy armor, which tightly wrapped his body. Only a slit was exposed from the helmet. In the middle of the helmet, a blood-red battle feather was inserted, extending from the forehead to the back of the neck, which added a bit of valiance to the figure. Behind the figure, silver-white long hair was fluttering in the wind. It was flamboyant and sharp. The momentum of the figure was full of a kind of insufferably arrogant bravery. From the other end of the street to the barracks, there were more than a dozen watchtowers and watchtowers. There was also a fence made of iron wire, and behind the fence was a tall brick wall. There happened to be a patrol team composed of more than a dozen knights on the street. However, the figure was moving faster and faster, as if he couldn't see the obstacles in front of him. This was not an ordinary attack, but a counterattack by one person against the whole cavalry legion. It was reasonable to say that the lone side should be timid, but Gerald, who was standing on the wall, felt cold all over. He had already recognized that the one opposite him was a Thunder Titan. "Stand there," the knight in the patrol team shouted. They quickly got into a battle formation, and the three knight in front also raised their battle spears. Dominique ignored them and continued to charge forward. The 4-meter-long axe in her hand shone with a frightening cold light under the moonlight. The knight in the patrol team swallowed a mouthful of saliva at the same time. Dominique's height was nothing, but the axe in her hand was too terrifying. The axe was half the size of a horse. Not to mention being hit by the axe, even being hit by, would be smashed into a pile of meat paste. The alarm sounded in the camp. The knight and the patrol team managed to calm down and urged their horses to charge forward. They were knights who had been on the battlefield for a long time. No matter how terrifying the enemy was, they would not betray their oath. This was their responsibility. Of course, it was also the responsibility of the so-called cannon fodder. Soon, Dominique collided with the knight. Before the knight thrust out his spear, Dominique had already swung her axe. After a cold light flashed, the three knight in front of her were cut in half at the same time. The head of one of the horses was also cut open. Blood and flesh sprayed out and turned into a rain of blood. The knight in the back instinctively moved to the side. No one wanted to collide with such a warrior head-on. Several spears shot out from the side and stabbed at Dominique's body with the light of combat aura. Domingue kept running forward. When the spear pierced her body, it only left some scratches on her heavy armor. However, the owner of the spear was bounced back by the tremendous force as if he had been struck by lightning. He fell to the ground in a mess. The last few knights were hesitating whether to attack or not, but Dominique had already swung her axe. The cold light flashed again, and 4 knights were cut in half in an instant. They fell to the ground in various postures amidst shrill screams. The axe in Dominique's hand was specially made for her by the craftsman of Riptide. It weighed more than 500 kilograms. Furthermore, Yelena had enchanted it with magic runes. Together with Dominique's overwhelming strength, every swing of the axe carried the power of thousands of kilograms. In comparison, the bodies, armors, and combat aura of the knight were extremely fragile. Attack! Attack! The soldiers on the watchtowers were alarmed. Arrows rained down on Dominique, mixed with the fireballs and lightning released by the sorcerers. Dominique ignored all the attacks and continued to dash forward into the rain of arrows. If the rain of arrows was a swarm of mosquitoes, then Dominique was a rampaging tank. No matter how many arrows there were, they couldn't harm her in the slightest. Furthermore, Dominique had an attack speed that didn't match her size. As soon as the large fireballs approached, they were shattered by the giant axe in Dominique's hand. As for the instantaneous lightning, Dominique didn't care about it all. Titans were born with the ability to control lightning, and they were also very resistant to lightning. Even a lightning Grand Magus would have to flee in a panic if they were to go up against a Thunder Titan. Otherwise, they would be slaughtered, let alone these ordinary mages. In fact, the true combat power of the Titans was far greater than that of the Abyss demons. Titans had the power of lightning, while the Abyss demons mastered the mysteries of space. If both sides didn't use their innate abilities and fought with pure strength, the Titans could beat the Abyss demons to a pulp. Furthermore, Dominique was a real Thunder Titan. The unstoppable Dominique approached the first watchtower. With a sweep of her axe, more than half of the wide iron base was cut off. The watchtower, which was more than 20 meters tall, began to tilt slowly. Finally, it crashed into a house on the side with a boom. Only one mage was able to cast a levitation spell and escape in time. The rest of the archers were smashed into a pile of mud. Dominique continued to charge forward. Every time she swung her axe, a watchtower would collapse. In the blink of an eye, the seemingly impenetrable defenses outside the camp were all destroyed by Dominique. Then, Dominique jumped over a 4-meter-tall barbed wire fence. She swung her axe down with all her might. Dust flew up from the brick wall, and an inverted V-shaped gap appeared. In the next moment, Dominique had charged into the camp. She stared at Gerald at first glance. Gerald, who had just put on his armor, was also staring at her. Then Gerald spurred his horse and charged straight at Dominique. Dominique, of course, wouldn't show any weakness. She strode forward to meet him. The two sides were less than 100 meters apart. When they charged at each other, they collided almost instantly. Gerald had already released his combat aura to the extreme. Dense light enveloped his entire body. Even his war spear became particularly dazzling. Then, Gerald waved his war spear and stabbed it at Dominique's chest like lightning. Dominique snorted coldly. She swung her axe from bottom to top, hitting Gerald's war spear. With a huge boom, Gerald's combat aura was scattered by the axe. The war spear that had followed him on the battlefield became twisted in the middle. The tip of the spear bounced back and hit Gerald's helmet. Gerald's body flew more than 30 meters away like a stone and landed heavily on the ground. Gerald's war horse also reared up. It flipped over and kicked its hooves in the air a few times before it stopped moving. Gerald was defeated in just one move. This was the difference in strength. In the face of absolute strength, identity, status, and power were all so pale and powerless. This was the fundamental reason why the strong were so widely respected. Therefore, the lords of all the cities on the continent were all top-grade or super-grade professions. This was also why lords could be without wisdom, charm, or even humanity, but they definitely couldn't be without strength. Charge! Charge! Countless knights appeared on the field and surrounded Dominique from all directions. Gerald's Knight Legion and Sandy's Magic Legion were Dismark's two sharp blades. They had fought countless tough battles. Although they knew how strong the enemy was, they wouldn't be scared so easily. Gerald struggled to get up from the ground and pulled off his twisted helmet. The rebound of the spear was too strong. Not only did it break his helmet, but it also left a bloody hole in his head. Gerald pushed away the support of his guards and pointed at Dominique, signaling them to attack her. Then, he took out a bottle of black potion and staggered away. The normal knights didn't know what Gerald was doing, but the guards around him all had fear in their eyes. They obediently let go of Gerald and ordered the knights to surround him. Out of nowhere, a graceful figure appeared in the sky above the drill ground. She was holding a hammer that could prove her identity. She pointed it forward, and the sky suddenly lit up. Streaks of lightning fell from the sky and mercilessly smashed onto the drill ground, tearing the knights who had just mustered up their courage into pieces of flesh and blood. 9-grid Thundercall. Everyone's attention was attracted by the invincible Dominique. They didn't expect a magus to be hiding among them. Under the attack of the giant pillars of lightning, the knights were knocked down one by one. However, Dominique was still able to move freely within the attack range of the 9-grid Thundercall, as if she wasn't affected at all. She dashed left and right, and the giant axe in her hand swept out beams of cold light that symbolized death. The cooperation between Dominique and Yelena was very good. Yelena's 9-grid Thundercall was like a sieve, killing all the knights whose strength didn't pass the standard. The remaining 10 knights were, of course, the strong ones, and Dominique's giant axe was just right to play a role. Gerald, who had already hidden at the edge of the field, stared at the potion in his hand. He was originally hesitant because once he drank the potion, he would never be able to turn back. However, Yelena's appearance had already killed all his chances of survival. Gerald took a deep breath and raised the potion. At this moment, a dagger pierced through his neck. Chipango's figure then appeared. His left hand tightly grabbed Gerald's hair, and his right hand pulled out the dagger and stabbed again. Chipango was only an 8th-grade thief, and his strength was far inferior to Gerald's. He shouldn't have been able to succeed so easily. It can only be said that Gerald had already been knocked out by Dominique, and the bloody hole in his head had seriously affected his ability to react. Furthermore, he had just made up his mind to walk on the path of no return, so it was inevitable that he was a little absent-minded and was caught off guard by Chipango's sudden attack. This was also Chipango's luck. Even Majordomo Gale wouldn't have been able to find a better opportunity than this. It wasn't until the second stab that Gerald came back to his senses. He roared and punched Chipango's face. Gerald's spear had already been destroyed, and his sword belt had also been broken during the parabolic movement. Now that he was unarmed, he could only fight Chipango with his fists. Gerald's fist hit Chipango's nose, and the originally hooked nose immediately turned into a bloody mess. Chipango's body also flipped backward, but his left hand was still tightly grabbing Gerald's hair. He actually pulled out a large amount of hair, and the pulling of his scalp tore open Gerald's wound again. Both of them screamed at the same time. However, Chipango had completely lost his mind. His left hand was randomly grabbing Gerald's right wrist, and then he pounced forward, his right hand holding the dagger tightly, and stabbed at Gerald with all his might. Gerald swung his left fist even faster. Unfortunately, this was the first time he had met such a crazy opponent. His fist had broken the opponent's nose, teeth, eyes, and ribs, but the opponent still wouldn't let go of him, as if there was some kind of blood feud between them. Chipango was also extraordinarily strong. Even after using all his strength, he still couldn't put the potion into his mouth. At this moment, Chipango didn't look like a human anymore. He kept laughing in a muffled voice, and his expression was extremely ferocious. He stabbed Gerald's neck, face, and head with his dagger. In just a few moments, he had stabbed Gerald dozens of times. Gradually, Gerald ran out of strength. His left fist turned from a punch to a shove, but Chipango's stabbing became even more vigorous. Even when Gerald's hand slowly dropped, Chipango still didn't stop. He kept pulling out the dagger, stabbing it, pulling it out, stabbing it again and again. It was as if today was the end of his life, and he was going to use everything he had. The bloody and crazy scene stunned Yelena. The whole plan was made by Majordomo Gale and the others. The core idea of the plan was to only use high-end forces. It would be great if they succeeded, but even if they failed, there wouldn't be any losses. Majordomo Gale had left a way out for everyone. Therefore, Morrison's and the others stayed in the barracks. Although this hurt their self-esteem, war was not a game. Not only did they have to kill the enemy, but they also had to protect the forces in their camp. Chipango was the only exception. He insisted on being in the same group as Dominique and Yelena, but of course he was rejected. Later, Chipango went to find Hanjin. No one knew what they talked about, but Hanjin unexpectedly agreed to Chipango's request. He even secretly told Dominique and Yelena to protect Chipango. Chipango insisted on joining the operation just to die together with Gerald. Yelena couldn't understand. Finally, a few nights' attention shifted away from the lightning and the valiant Dominique, and they saw a scene that shocked them to the core. However, Dominique was much faster than them. She rushed to Chipango's side in a few steps, kicked him down, and chopped off Gerald's head with her axe. Chapter 317. A shabby carriage came from the east and stopped in front of Dismark's mansion. Inside the carriage, Guevara, Majordomo Gale, and Jedi's looked at each other. Majordomo Gale reached out and opened the door. Jedi smiled and said, "I wish you two a safe journey. You should say that to Dismark." Guevara replied lightly and then picked up his dragon spear. The guards in front of the mansion were annoyed to see a shabby carriage parked in front of the mansion. As the supreme ruler of the Holy Crown City, many people came to visit Dismark every day, but no one dared to park their carriage in front of the mansion. Moreover, there were special parking spaces for carriages on both sides of the mansion. 7 or 8 guards surrounded the carriage. One of them shouted, "Who allowed you to park here? Get out of here. Do you hear me?" Majordomo Gale had already released his invisibility spell and jumped out of the carriage. Guevara slowly got out of the carriage with his dragon spear. He squinted his eyes and quietly looked at Dismark's mansion. Once upon a time, he tried every means and even racked his brains to become the owner of this mansion. But in the end, he always failed. Who would have thought that in his old age, there would be a day when his wish would come true? Guevara's heart was filled with emotions. In fact, when he decided to assist Hanjin, he only hoped that Hanjin could inherit his dream. As for anything else, he didn't dare to think about it, because decades of suffering had taught him that the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. But Hanjin's growth was too fast. Almost every day, he would be different. In the blink of an eye, He had changed from a nobody who fled everywhere to a powerful man who made the surrounding lords tremble in fear. The betrayal of the elves and Majordomo Gale's little tricks were all strong evidence. As the saying goes, surprises always come when you least expect them to. He struggled, he fought, but he was defeated again and again. In the end, he was discouraged and only wanted to choose a suitable young man to inherit his dream. But in the past year, he had seen one miracle after another. His dream had come true inadvertently. Zagund had turned into the dust of history, and now it was Dismark's turn. How many years had he struggled for this? The surrounding guards suddenly became quiet because they saw an arrogant old man. It was the Dragon Knight, Gavara. With a spear in hand, Gavara was unstoppable. Although he was very old, his temperament was still as majestic as a mountain and as majestic as the sea. He was born to be a commander. His eyes flashed with a leisurely and tranquil expression. His body and the dragon spear in his hand were straight. Gavara was wearing a very ordinary robe. It was said that clothes made the man and gold made the Buddha. But Gavara's robe was stained with his light. It faintly exuded a determined and arrogant aura. Gavara's fighting style was passionate and brave. To be precise, Gavara did not have the strength to be invincible. At least he was definitely not Nicholas's opponent. But he had the will to be invincible. Previously, he had slaughtered his way into Black Raven City and fought against the entire city by himself. Even then, he had made Zaganai tremble in fear and panic. At this moment, he would not take the small lord's mansion seriously. What's more, he was no longer alone. He had Hanjin, Jeds, and many comrades who he could trust and live and die with him. Finally, the late magicians arrived at the front hall. But before they could see the situation clearly, a cruel figure suddenly appeared between them. It flashed from east to west and reaped their lives unscrupulously. The figure moved so quickly that the magicians couldn't even use their mental power to lock onto the enemy. Just as their eyes caught the figure suddenly disappeared and reappeared in another place. They couldn't even lock onto it, let alone cast spells. Jeds walked down from the carriage. In fact, he did not need to intervene, but he was not willing to stand the loneliness of doing nothing. In his boredom, Jeds raised the scepter in his hand and blessed Gavara and Majordomo Gale with God's blessing to prove his existence. The magicians could not lock on a Majordomo Gale, but it did not mean that he could not either. There were only 2 archbishops in the Pan-continent, and now he was probably the only one left. Of course, a noble title had to be matched with a corresponding strength. When Gavara, Jedis, and Majordomo Gale joined forces, they formed an outstanding think tank. One person was in charge of the main attack, one was in charge of the ambush, and one was in charge of support. They cooperated with each other very well. If they were willing to lower themselves and form a mercenary team, it would definitely be the most terrifying mercenary team in the world. Gavara strode forward on the bloody ground. Yes, it was a bloody ground. Gavara's spear style was too vicious. Every warrior who fell under his spear was mutilated. As long as they touched the tip of the spear, their bodies would explode and turn into a rain of blood. In just a short period of time, more than 40 warriors had used their lives to prove Gavara's strength. The blood that flowed out of their bodies dyed the entire front hall red. The door of the hall was kicked open, and a furious Dismark strode out. When he saw Gavara, he was immediately stunned. The Dragon Knight Gavara was not only Zagund's nightmare, but also Dismark's nightmare. The past where he had to endure humiliation, and humiliation flashed through Dismark's mind. In the end, it turned into an unbearable roar. Gavara! He is Gavara? Adonis' slightly stooped body suddenly straightened, and his pair of dim old eyes became bright and full of vigor. He is very strong, Aud said slowly. Lord Dismark, don't worry. Leave it to us. Amij smiled. The 3 of us? That's a little unfair. Aud looked a little hesitant. F***CK fairness. Adonis gripped his spear with his aged hands. History is always written by the victors. If the three of you can take action, then today, this will be the place where Guevara will die. Dismark's spirits were lifted, and the fear hidden in his heart disappeared. The surrounding figures blocked Dismark's line of sight. If he could see Jed's standing silently outside the mansion, and if he was lucky enough to know Jed's identity, perhaps he would not be so confident. Asterisk, 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 they're fighting. They're fighting. It must be very lively. Harley couldn't help but cry out in joy. Harley, who was completely composed of mist, had many advantages that others could not achieve. For example, he could extend his neck to a height of more than 10 meters. Now, he was using this method to observe the surroundings. However, in order not to attract attention, he only extended his neck to a height of a few meters, so he could not see the scene of the fierce battle. Hanjin lazily leaned against a tree trunk, ignoring Harley. According to Majordomo Gale's original plan, he should have been the one to deal with Dismark. However, after Hanjin returned to the God of War, the plan was changed. Aya, only we have nothing to do here. This is so annoying. Harley's neck turned in one direction, turning in circles. Master, why hasn't that guy come out yet? He'll come out, Hanjin said indifferently. Because of the three holy knights, Dismark will not let that guy appear on the same battlefield as the holy knights. However, that guy will definitely sneak out to see what's going on. Harley, keep an eye on him. Master, you can rest assured. Harley laughed. Afraid of the three holy knights? Hee. This is where Dismark is useless. Oh, ha! Master, aren't I living well now? What would Jed's dare to say? Harley's tone was full of pride. That's why, compared to you, Dismark is too far behind. As an intelligent ghost, Harley would never let go of any opportunity to flatter. Hanjin shook his head and did not speak. Master, are you really not worried? Harley called out again. Why should I be worried? I understand. The ones who appear at the end are the real big shots. This is in line with your identity, Master. Shut up. Hanjin simply closed his eyes. He was not worried about the other battlefields. Dominique and Yelena were dealing with Gerald, while Guevara, Jed's, and Majordomo Gale were dealing with Dismark. They all had the absolute advantage. Jed's had secretly contacted the three holy knights. With the power of 6 masters, even a demigod would be defeated, let alone a single Dismark. The only thing that could happen was that Cain could not control the Magic Legion. However, as long as he could stall for time, the battle would be over by the time the Magic Legion arrived. Harley was silent for a moment, then suddenly shouted, Master! Over there! I sense that aura! In the southwest corner of the mansion, there was a small, lonely room. The door opened, and a blurry figure slowly walked out. His body was surrounded by a faint mist, and in the mist, an extremely terrifying face was faintly discernible. If it was a skull, he had a nose, eyes, lips, and facial features. If it was a face, he was so thin that he couldn't be any thinner. Every time he exhaled, his nose would sway like a blade of grass in the wind. When he inhaled, his nose would shrink into a ball, and even his nostrils were blocked. It made people worry that he would suffocate to death in the next moment. The figure listened carefully to the shouts from afar, then raised his magic staff. However, after a moment of hesitation, he put it down again. His pet could be the best scout, but the Holy Knight was very sensitive to the aura of pets. The light combat power was like the terrible sunlight, and it could kill his pet in an instant. Moreover, it could expose his identity and cause big trouble. The figure pondered for a while, then took out a metal mask from the space ring and put it on his head. The mist surrounding him collapsed into his body at the same time. From the outside, he had become almost like a normal person, but he was so thin that it seemed like a gust of wind could blow him away. The figure took a step and slowly walked out of the courtyard. However, just as he walked to the center of the courtyard, a mischievous voice sounded behind him. Hey, stand there. Where are you going? The figure suddenly froze, then slowly turned around. A calm and young figure jumped into his sight. Compared to Hanjin, Harley was particularly noisy. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws, and said with a voice full of confidence, Yes, master. It's this guy. Kill him. Ha ha. Kill him. Enemy? The figure asked with a hoarse voice. Without waiting for Han Jin to speak, Harley shouted first. Nonsense, are you a fool? This is your pet. The figure's gaze fell on Harley, and 2 red dots appeared in his eyes, and the red light was getting brighter and brighter. Pet? I guess so. Han Jin smiled. I'm sorry, but from now on, he no longer belongs to you. The figure slowly raised his magic staff. Because he is very useful to me. Whatever. Han Jin shrugged. As you can see, he is very long-winded and always annoying. I have never liked him. Master, you? Why are you? Harley said in a pitiful voice. He could not believe that he had done so much to please Han Jin, but he had received such an evaluation. Thank you. The figure was very polite. Obviously, he had received a comprehensive education. However, his actions were much more violent. He suddenly turned his magic staff in the air, and a cone-shaped gray air wave shot out like a sharp arrow, hitting Harley directly. Harley screamed. The gray air wave pierced through his body and then turned into a mass of swirling air enveloping him. The air wave continued to tear and devour his body. However, Harley was the spirit of the soul-devouring orb, and he had an extremely strong devouring power. The scene was very strange. Harley was devouring the air wave, and the air wave was devouring Harley. The winner and loser depended on who could devour faster. Han Jin did not interfere. In fact, he was not someone who liked to talk nonsense. Compared to that, he preferred to kill first. He was keeping a low profile now because he wanted to force out all the power of this mysterious figure. This was the real reason why he changed his plan. I have many, many pets. The figure did not attack again, but quietly observed Harley. However, there was a change in his voice, and it was full of joy. Oh, I have always been looking for a way to gather all the pets together and become one because the power of a single pet is too weak. Unfortunately, after decades, I still can't do it. This makes me more and more desperate. The figure's gaze turned to Han Jin. Only now do I know what I've been waiting for. It turns out that I've been waiting for him. Is that so? Han Jin was very cooperative. In terms of combat power, he knew that there were many experts who could pose a threat to him. However, in terms of the ability to deal with ghosts, there was no one in this world who could compare with him. This was because he had inherited the experience and wisdom of thousands of years of Tao. This mysterious expert in front of him was very good, and he had created another form of ghost. However, how could he compare with countless self-cultivators alone? Thank you. Thank you very much. You have let me see hope. Ha! Ha ha ha! The figure laughed loudly, and his laughter was full of uncontrollable ecstasy. Han Jin stretched out his hand and made a pleased gesture. In fact, he was equally happy. In the past, Harley was just a clown. If there were really so many evil ghosts, then from now on, Harley would be a reliable assistant. Chapter 3:18. The figure slowly raised his magic staff. Perhaps it was because he was overjoyed, or perhaps he was overconfident, but he didn't cast a magic shield or any other defensive measures on himself. Instead, he began to chant a spell. Running around without clothes was known as streaking. For a magician to face danger with his fragile body was considered a naked battle. Even someone as strong as Jedis wouldn't dare to do such a thing. With only one sentence of the spell, the magic staff in the figure's hand immediately turned into powder. The wind howled angrily, and an evil and cold aura swept out in all directions like an explosion. The air became heavy, and the withered grass in the courtyard lowered their heads at the same time, as if they were being pressed down by something. The moonlight and starlight seemed particularly dim, and even the clean light carried a sense of death. Han Jin slowly closed his eyes and chanted a spell in a low voice. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes, and they shone brightly. He could clearly see that this small courtyard was crowded with thousands of ghosts. Ghosts didn't have physical bodies, and when they gathered together, they were all in one, and they were all in one. Just looking at them made one's scalp tingle. If it were 2 years ago, Han Jin might have cried out in excitement. But now, Han Jin had become very experienced and calm. Although the enemy had given him a huge surprise, his expression didn't change at all. Han Jin stretched out his hand, and a blood-red ball appeared in his hand. It was the soul-devouring orb. In the soul-devouring orb, a black light was swimming quickly. Cromwell's ghost had been imprisoned for a long time, and when he suddenly saw thousands of his companions outside, he was extremely excited. He jumped up and down and rushed left and right, but he couldn't get out no matter how hard he tried. Command of the 5 prison laws, 9 underworlds bow, evil vanquish, everlasting Dao Qi. Open! Han Jin shouted and threw the soul-devouring orb. The soul-devouring orb hit Harley squarely, and then it emitted a rich red light. The red light spilled out like mercury, illuminating the entire courtyard. Han Jin, the mysterious powerhouse, and the countless ghosts were all covered in a layer of red light. Harley, who had returned to the soul-devouring orb, was full of energy again. He made a few gestures inside, and then it spun quickly. The flowing red light seemed to be attracted by something and rushed toward the soul-devouring orb. All the ghosts shrouded in the red light couldn't help but turn into red arrows of light and shoot toward the soul-devouring orb. All of this happened in an instant. Just a moment ago, the red light had illuminated the entire courtyard. In the next moment, the red light had shrunk back into the soul-devouring orb, taking away all the ghosts that were shrouded by the red light. With this release and retraction, the howling wind stopped abruptly, and the world returned to its original tranquility. The flashing red light in the soul-devouring orb grew brighter and brighter. Then, with a boom, it burst into a dazzling light. After the light dissipated, the soul-devouring orb turned into a pure black color. It was as clear as water, as smooth as jade, and gave off a profound and heavy feeling. To Han Jin, the whole process was so smooth. His own Dao arts and the power of the soul-devouring orb allowed him to easily capture all the ghosts. As for the Black Shadow, he didn't want to believe what was happening in front of him. It wasn't destruction, but devouring. It meant that in a certain field, he wasn't a pioneer, a creator, but a self-righteous joke. No, the Black Shadow howled and staggered towards the soul-devouring orb. Han Jin pointed his sword finger, and a green light shot out. The Black Shadow was already distracted, and his only focus was on the soul-devouring orb. He ignored such a dazzling light. The green light hit his left rib, and the Black Shadow flew out sideways, smashing a big hole in the courtyard wall, and flew into the courtyard. There were a few servants living in the courtyard. When they heard the screams in front of them, they didn't know what was going on and gathered in the courtyard to discuss nervously. In the end, the Black Shadow crashed into 2 of the servants, and the 2 servants were sent flying. The Black Shadow rolled on the ground 7 to 8 times before he could stabilize himself. Han Jin waved his hand, and the soul-devouring orb flew towards him at an extremely fast speed and landed firmly in his palm. In fact, ever since he was reborn, he had never refined a real magic treasure, including the green light, the immortal binding rope, and so on. They weren't considered high-grade magic treasures, and even the God of War, which he had worked so hard on, was an incomplete Dao instrument. Now, with the help of thousands of ghosts, he had finally refined his first high-grade magic treasure. Looking at the soul-devouring orb in his hand, Han Jin was not only happy, but also gratified. The soul-devouring orb kept spinning, and its shape became smaller and smaller. Finally, it became a black pearl, slightly bigger than a thumb. This was the real soul-devouring orb. Following a mournful and unwilling howl, the Black Shadow struggled to get up, and his skinny right hand pointed straight at Han Jin. Han Jin frowned slightly. Although he didn't use his full strength just now, it wasn't something that an ordinary person could withstand. It was really unexpected that such a withered body could get up. With a bang, the Black Shadow's right hand was broken, and the bones in his hand turned into a pile of powder. Soon after, it condensed into a javelin-like object and shot toward Hanjin. Hanjin released the ground shrinking spell, and his body disappeared from the spot. At the same time, he appeared on the wall of the courtyard, easily dodging the javelin attack. The Black Shadow looked around blankly. His life's biggest reliance was those thousands of ghosts. Without them, he was no different from a piece of trash. Not to mention attacking Hanjin. He couldn't even find where Hanjin was. Hey, Hanjin used 2 fingers to pinch the soul-devouring orb. When the Black Shadow heard the shout, he hurriedly turned in Hanjin's direction. At this moment, the soul-devouring orb was bounced away, leaving an almost imperceptible trace in the air. With the sound of wind and thunder, it shot right into the Black Shadow's pupil, and then came out from the back of the Black Shadow's head. What was shocking was that only a small amount of blood spurted out from the front of the Black Shadow's head, while a rain of blood burst out from the back of the Black Shadow's head. The figure swayed and knelt on the ground bit by bit. Then he fell to the ground. His body slowly shrank, or rather it was melting. In a moment, his white bones were exposed. Then, even the bones turned into fine dust. Only a robe with a decaying aura was left behind. Asterisk, 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 kill. The high-spirited Dismark roared and rushed towards Guevara with his spear. Although the 3 Holy Knight had already expressed their stance, he was the Lord. So, he could allow others to help him, but he would never pass this honor to anyone else. Moreover, he wanted to shatter the nightmare that had been in his heart for decades. He wanted to kill Guevara with his own hands. Guevara also roared and swung his spear. The 2 Holy Knight in front of him were hit by the tip of the spear and flew away like helpless straws. Then, Guevara's body shot straight towards Dismark in midair. A silver light bloomed on the tip of Guevara's spear and immediately turned into a roaring electric light, enveloping Guevara's entire body. He had turned into a giant hedgehog. The flashing electric arcs flowed rapidly and twisted within a radius of more than 10 meters, looking like sharp thorns. Dismark held his spear and faced Guevara fearlessly. When he took the first step, other than his high-spirited aura, he was no different from an ordinary person. When he took the second step, his body was engulfed in flames. When he took the third step, the flames had turned red. The remaining snow around Dismark began to melt and disappear at the same time, turning into steam. If Guevara looked like a vigorous silver dragon, then Dismark looked like a flying meteorite. This was a collision between 2 fighting techniques that spared no effort. AI Media suddenly moved. His body swayed forward, and the spear in his hand stabbed towards the back of Dismark's head like a venomous snake. From the outside, AI Media looked like a decent young man, who knew that he would be so vicious when he attacked. If this spear pierced through, even if Dismark's armor and combat aura could protect him, he would still lose his ability to fight due to the severe shock to his head. At the same time, Oder also moved. Perhaps it was because of his reaction speed. He was half a beat slower than AI Media. His spear was aimed at Dismark's back from afar. In comparison, Adonis' movements were much gentler. The target he chose to attack was Dismark's thigh. However, on Dismark's entire body, that was the only place that was not protected by armor. Almost all of the people present were top-grade or high-grade professionals. There was no hypocritical hesitation. Either they did not attack, or they attacked to destroy the enemy. Dismark's eyes suddenly revealed a look of grief and indignation. He cannot be blamed for this. Ever since the continent fell into chaos, the power of the church had gradually shrunk and finally retreated to the southwest. Very few important figures of the church walked this land. However, the legends were still praised by the people. Most of the heroes in the stories were righteous, especially the Holy Knight who believed in the God of Light. Humility, glory, sacrifice, courage, compassion, faith, honesty, and justice were the embodiment of the Holy Knight. Dismark would not underestimate anyone, but he never thought that the Holy Knight would be so insidious. Dismark turned around abruptly and raised the knight's shield on his left arm. A dazzling white light suddenly bloomed, firmly enveloping Dismark's body. Then, A spear with countless scorching tongues of fire pierced through the white light and pierced towards Adonis. If Dismark was facing only one person, no matter how great the difference in lethality and speed was, Dismark would have countless ways to turn the situation around. However, he was facing 4 experts who were on par with him. He could not take care of all of them. He could only choose one of them, and the old and dim-sighted Adonis naturally became his target. After a few loud bangs, 2 spears pierced through the white light, and Adonis blocked Dismark's spear with his own. Dismark had the lion's shield to protect himself, but Adonis did not. If he fought against Dismark, he would be the one to die. The raging flames collided with the light, fighting aura and turned into countless turbulent currents. Adonis was forced back a dozen steps and barely managed to stabilize himself. Dismark was also forced back 7 or 8 steps, but his body was still enveloped in the white light, and his expression could not be seen. Guevara had already arrived. His spear struck down in an extremely powerful and handsome manner, like an eagle swooping down on a rabbit. Countless flashing electric arcs exploded at the same time. Chapter 319. Countless cracks appeared on the bluestone slabs around Dismark at the same time. The cracks deepened at an unimaginable speed, and soon turned into extremely fine sand and stones. Then, with a boom, the sand and stones flew into the air with extreme force. Even Odo and Amij, who were nearby, could not help but cover their faces with their arms to avoid being accidentally injured by the power of the lightning. Dismark was very experienced in combat. Although he was hit by Guevara's spear and half of his back was blown into a bloody mess, he did not panic in the face of danger. He borrowed the force of the spear and flew forward, because he knew that he had fallen into a trap. The only way to survive was to rush out of the encirclement and join up with his guards. Adonis had just stabilized himself when Dismark rushed over. With a roar, he swung his flaming spear again, stabbing towards Adonis' chest. After the collision just now, Adonis knew that there was a certain gap between him and Dismark. He did not intend to meet Dismark head-on again. He raised his spear and blocked Dismark's attack, then pushed it to the side. The next moment, he spun in a circle while retreating quickly to offset the force of Dismark's attack. His body passed by Dismark, and the two of them did not have the time or opportunity to launch a second attack. 3 Dragon Knight suddenly attacked Dismark. Dismark turned around to block, and Dismark flew back. All these actions were completed in a flash. Before the guards of the Lord's mansion could see what had happened, Dismark was already seriously injured. Dismark rushed into the battle formation of the guards. In a moment of desperation, he did not care about anything else. His burning combat aura and heavy force sent several guards flying, and some were even set on fire. Then Dismark raised his left arm high, and a dazzling white light shot straight into the sky, illuminating the whole sky. Outside the Lord's mansion, Jedis also raised his magic staff at the same time. The white light, surging in the air, quickly condensed, and then turned into a huge door that was faintly discernible and illusory. The door was engraved with countless magic runes that could be seen clearly. Clouds and mist lingered around the door, and a suffocating pressure hung down from the sky, filling the air like mercury. That was the gate of heaven. The guards of the Lord's mansion were stunned. Even the battle-hardened Dismark was stunned, because 2 gates of heaven had appeared in the sky. An angel completely composed of light flew out of the gate of heaven and fell straight towards Dismark. The other gate of heaven opened at the same time, and another angel descended to the world. Although they gave off the same feeling, there was a huge gap between the 2 angels. The former angel was only about 4 meters tall, while the latter angel was dozens of meters tall. The visual impact of the two was very strong, just like a storm wolf standing next to a little rabbit. The giant angel waved its lightsaber and struck down with all its might. The light of the lightsaber had firmly enveloped Dismark, while the smaller angel stood above Dismark, waving its lightsaber in an attempt to block the attack of its own kind. The faces of Adonis and the others changed greatly, and they retreated as fast as they could. Even Guevara stopped chasing. It was the forbidden spell of light, the punishment of the angel of light. A deafening explosion sounded, and the whole Holy Crown city trembled violently. The atrium of the Lord's mansion was paved with hard corundum, but it was shattered in an instant. The fierce shock waves swept in all directions, destroying the courtyard walls, the mansion gate, the stable, and the small buildings in the Lord's mansion. The nearby buildings were also affected. Even Hanjin, who had just taken back the soul-devouring orb, had to hide underground. The magician towers in the distance lit up one after another, forming a tall magic barrier. Unfortunately, their reaction was too slow. All the magicians on Hanjin's side were top-notch, and their goal was to be ruthless, accurate, and fast. By the time the magicians on the magician towers heard the alarm and hurriedly activated the magician towers, it was already too late. Dismart's home, which had been run by him for decades, was almost turned into ruins. The guards and the magicians who were hiding behind all disappeared, turning into pools of messy flesh and blood. In the original atrium, there was a huge pit, which was almost 1/10 the size of the entire Lord Mansion. However, it was not very deep because the corundum made by the alchemists had withstood a considerable amount of force. Only a few people could still stand. Dismark was still alive, and so was the angel above his head, but the light it emitted had dimmed. On the other hand, Guevara and the 3 Paladin Knight were still intact. Jeds had already blessed himself with absolute barrier. He stepped over the collapsed gate and slowly walked inside. Major Domo Gale's figure appeared behind him, shaking his head as he walked. He also whispered something in a low voice, as if blaming Jeds for not greeting him. Although both of them had summoned angels of light, there was a world of difference in power. The angel of light, summoned by Jeds, was at the cost of his own life, releasing all of his power to launch a single attack. This kind of nature was somewhat similar to the terrorist bombs in Hanjin's world. However, the angel of light, summoned by Dismar from the Lion King's shield, had the ability to fight continuously. Of course, if no one else intervened, the loser would have been Dismark. His magic power had been exhausted, but Dismark and the Angel of Light he summoned still had a certain amount of fighting power. The problem was that this was not Jeds' battle alone. Looking at the messy scene around him, everything he had managed had turned into ruins, and all his loyal guards had died in battle. Dismark was in extreme grief. His whole body trembled violently, and then he let out a heart-wrenching roar. The Angel of Light attacked before Dismark did. Its body flashed, and in an instant, it approached Guevara. The solid sword of light slashed down on Guevara's head. Just as Guevara was about to swing his battle spear, Jeds once again raised the scepter in his hand. A dazzling curtain of light appeared and enveloped Guevara. Jed's face had turned pale. Obviously, he had used up all of his magic power after releasing another absolute barrier. Major Domo Gale had wanted to join the battle, but when he saw this scene, he hurriedly stopped and stood beside Jeds to protect him. The reason why the strong were powerful was not only because they had unimaginable offensive and defensive power, but also because they were able to reach the top of the pyramid among tens of millions of people. The experience of each of them could be written into a long biography. Over the years, through the trials and hardships, they had gained a lot. In fact, this was the first time Guevara, Jeds, and the others had worked together in battle. There were still some areas where they needed to get used to, but their experience, reaction, and so on were enough to make up for these shortcomings. Guevara wanted to use his spear, but the moment the absolute barrier appeared, he lowered the tip of his spear again. He looked at the Angel of Light coldly and calmly. Adonis and the other 2 Holy Knight quickly moved closer to Guevara. Their positions had already surrounded the Angel of Light. With a loud bang, the curtain of light surrounding Guevara trembled violently, but it did not collapse. Adonis and the others let out angry roars at the same time. 3 battle spears pierced out like lightning, approaching the Angel of Light from 3 different angles. Guevara did not stay idle either. Roaring thunder bloomed again, and the battle spear, which was no longer clearly visible, pierced the Angel of Light's lower abdomen with a deafening explosion. After enduring the attack of the forbidden spell, the Angel of Light was not much stronger than Jed's. Although he instinctively swung his greatsword and once again slashed at the curtain of light surrounding Guevara, he had used up too much of his strength and still could not destroy the absolute barrier. Immediately after, the battle spears of Adonis and the others pierced the Angel of Light's body. The body, which seemed to be made of solid light, was twisted into pieces by the 4 battle spears. It then turned into countless moving light spots and flew towards Dismark. There were flames burning around Dismark's body, and even his face could not be seen clearly. However, his lion roar was unusually clear and also unusually crazy. Then, a flying fire dragon pierced out and shot towards Guevara. However, his choice was very stupid. The combat power of a holy knight was not as good as other knights of the same level due to the characteristics of the light fighting technique. However, a holy knight was usually supported by a high-ranking priest. The result was not as simple as 1 + 1 is equal to 2. With the support of a priest, a holy knight could unleash extremely terrifying combat power. Now that Dismark had clearly blessed Guevara with absolute barrier, it was hard to understand why he still chose to attack Guevara. It could only be said that Dismark had lost his mind at this moment. Guevara did not budge an inch. He waved his spear and met the attack head-on. The roaring thunder and the dancing fire dragon collided with each other, creating a loud bang. Countless silver white and dark red combat auras scattered in all directions. Guevara took a few steps back and leaped into the air. Blood suddenly burst out from behind Dismark. The place where he was previously injured could not withstand such a violent collision, and the wound became bigger and deeper. The unbearable pain and the rapid loss of blood made him dizzy. He even saw stars, and his body involuntarily retreated. The Holy Knight, Aud, took a step forward and chased after Dismark's figure with his spear. Dismark used the last of his strength and raised his battle spear to block Aud's attack. At the same time, Adonis and Amijay attacked at the same time. Their 2 battle spears stabbed at Dismark like lightning, one from the left and one from the right. Guevara pounced on Dismark, and his battle spear pierced through his chest from top to bottom. Blood spurted out, and the roaring thunder tore Dismark and his armor into 2 halves. From the beginning of the battle until now, only a few breaths had passed, but the battle could no longer be reversed. Dismark had been cut into 2 halves. Adonis' eyes lit up, his figure flashed, and he quickly approached Dismark's corpse. Guevara did not know what Adonis was going to do, and he could not help but be stunned. Then he saw that Adonis' hand had already grabbed the knight's shield on Dismark's left arm. It was the Lion King's shield. Then Adonis was stunned, because a foot suddenly appeared and stepped on the Lion King's shield first. Adonis was stunned. He slowly turned his head and saw a pair of condescending eyes looking down at him. Yesterday, an old friend that I had not seen for a few years came back. He insisted that I go out and play with him. I spent almost all of yesterday and today with him. The update was late, so please forgive me. Chapter 320. While Adonis was looking at Han was also looking at Adonis. His expression was calm and determined. Their gazes collided. Adonis' eyes were sharp, while Han gave off a feeling of calmness. However, neither of them had any intention of backing down. They were partners who had just fought side by side, but now they were in a stalemate over some spoils of war. It was somewhat ridiculous. From Han point of view, although he was a hands-off boss, he would never allow anyone to challenge his authority and position. It was one thing to chat and laugh together, but it was another thing to cross the line without permission. Moreover, he was determined to get the Lion King's shield. It could be said that if it really came to that point, he would not hesitate to make a move. Adonis also had a reason to persist to the end. The sacred gear was originally a divine artifact of the Holy See, but with the passage of time, the set of the sacred gear was lost for various reasons. In the end, Even the symbol of the Pope, the crown of divinity, was lost. It was a big joke. Now that he saw the Lion King's shield, of course he would work hard to save the Holy See's face. The atmosphere became extremely tense. Guevara took a step back and pointed his war spear at the ground. His eyes became unfocused because he was concentrating on sensing the aura of Aud and Amij. As long as these two people made the slightest move, he would immediately attack. This was because Han Jin carried his ideals and hopes. Among all the people present, he was Han Jin's staunchest supporter. Aud and Amij did not move. They were also true powerhouses, so of course they knew what Guevara was doing. In order to prevent the situation from worsening, they could only remain silent. The situation had suddenly developed to this point, which was something they had never expected. Jedis, what do they mean? Majordomo Gale asked coldly behind Jedis. Jedis smiled bitterly. He felt a myriad of emotions in his heart. They were too similar. The current Han Jin and Nicholas were too similar. When they wanted something, they would never compromise because of any pressure. Although Adonis was showing off his abilities, he was a coward at heart. He was like a wolf that had discovered that its territory had been invaded. He bared his fangs at the approaching tiger, trying to scare the tiger away. Han Jin was the tiger. He was calm and unperturbed, not caring about the other party's threat at all. Jedis, Majordomo Gale raised his voice. Adonis, come back, Jed said slowly. Adonis' gaze slowly shifted from Han Jin to Jed's. Sir, come back, Jed said in a resolute voice. After a moment of hesitation, Adonis finally let go of his hand. When he straightened his back, the sharpness in his eyes faded bit by bit, and he became dizzy again. Then he bent his body and slowly walked back. Han Jin bent down and took off the knight's shield. After looking at it for a moment, he put it into his spatial ring. Raphael, have you settled it? Guevara coughed dryly. Yes, a little faster than you guys. Although he had the upper hand in the confrontation, Han Jin did not show any complacency. He was still calm. Jeds, send the signal. It's time for Lang Ning and Alexander to make their move. Okay, Jeds nodded. His expression was also very calm, as if nothing had happened just now. It's time to go to the prison of the Holy Crown City. Han Jin's gaze fell on Guevara. Would you like to come with me? What about here? Just spread the news that Dismark has been killed. There are not so many fools in the world. They know what to do. Han Jin smiled. Okay. Han Jin and Guevara stepped forward and walked towards the west of the Holy Crown City. Majordomo Gale whispered behind Jeds. Jeds, do you remember what you told me? About Nikolai? Yes. Jeds nodded. That's good. I hope you will never forget it. Majordomo Gale said and disappeared into the air. Adonis, Aud, and Amij silently looked at Han Jin's back. When Han Jin was far away, Amij suddenly said, My lord, Amij, go and tell the priest to attack according to the plan. Jed said, But do your own thing. Jeds interrupted Amij again. Amij sighed softly, exchanged glances with Adonis and Aud, and then turned and walked away. The Holy Crown City was in chaos. Countless soldiers were running around the city like a group of headless flies. Dismark, Gerald, Sandy, and the others were dead. The command center of the Holy Crown City was almost completely destroyed. Gerald's Knight Regiment and Magic Legion were controlled. The soldiers could not receive any orders and did not know where to go. They could only run around aimlessly. Han Jin and Guevara strolled on the long street. Perhaps it was because they looked too calm, or perhaps it was because the hem of Guevara's robe was stained red with blood, but the soldiers along the way all stepped aside when they saw Han Jin and Guevara. No one dared to disturb them. Only a patrol team recklessly came to greet them. But as soon as the two sides approached, the soldiers of the patrol team clearly heard the conversation between Han Jin and Guevara. Killing Dismark should be considered as fulfilling your wish, but you don't seem to be in the right place. What do I look right? Laughing? Drinking? Ha! Let me explain. I don't know. I just feel lazy and uninterested in anything. Maybe I'm really old. The soldiers of the patrol team felt as if they had been splashed with ice water. They were frozen from the top of their heads to the bottom of their feet. They were dumbfounded and did not dare to move. Hanjin and Guevara did not make things difficult for the patrol team. They just passed by and continued to walk to the west of the Holy Crown City. "You're not old." The casual conversation once again came into the ears of the patrol team. "And now you're not allowed to be old, huh? And that Prudence and Chasam, we still have a lot of enemies." The prison of the Holy Crown City had been under martial law. Fabian, the warden, was standing on the wall of the prison, anxiously looking into the distance. Every time there was a riot, the atmosphere in the prison would become very tense. Of course, most of the prisoners in the prison were criminals. If the prison was attacked and the prisoners escaped, Fabian, the warden, would become a real member of the prison. However, his identity would be changed from the manager to the manager. He had been here for more than 10 years, so he knew the darkness of the prison too well. He didn't want to fall into that situation at all. An old man and a young man slowly walked from the distance and gradually approached the prison. Warden Fabian could not help but raise his vigilance. The archers on both sides drew their longbows, and several magicians clenched their magic wands, ready to attack at any time. Just as Warden Fabian was about to open his mouth and issue a warning, the old man's figure suddenly moved. The golden light shone brightly, and the old man left behind a series of afterimages in the air, shooting over like a sharp arrow. Then, with a loud bang, the prison's iron gate turned into countless flying fragments. Fabian almost fainted, and the archers were also shaken to the ground. When they came to their senses, the first thing they did was to put down their weapons. Even the magicians obediently put away their magic wands. The iron gate of the prison was covered with 2 layers of iron armor and a thick layer of corundum in the middle, which was enough to withstand large-scale magic attacks. The enemy could completely destroy the gate with a single shot. This was not something they could interfere with. "Who is the warden?" Hanjin shouted loudly. At this moment, he had already walked into the prison, and Guevara, who had put away his gun, stood quietly beside him. Fabian braced himself and walked down the steps. He lowered his head and said, "My lords, may I ask?" "From today onwards, I am the lord of this place," Hanjin said calmly. "There's a giant dragon imprisoned in your prison, right? Bring us there." Fabian's forehead was covered in sweat. He did not dare to speak. He was the king of this prison. His subordinates could give up resisting or even surrender, but he could not. If Dismark came to pursue the matter, the guards would push all the blame to him. He could not easily express his stance. "Dismark is already dead," Guevara said softly. Fabian's body trembled. He gathered his courage and raised his head. His gaze fell on Guevara's body. He looked at the hem of Guevara's long robe that had been dyed red. He finally gritted his teeth and said with a smile, "My lords, please follow me." Under Fabian's lead, Hanjin and Guevara walked through the square and went around to the back of a small building. There was a huge rock behind the small building. More than 10 warriors and 2 magicians were guarding beside the huge rock. "Open it." Fabian did not explain anything to his subordinates. He was also worried that if he did not explain clearly, it would cause trouble instead. The 2 magicians looked at Hanjin and Guevara curiously. They followed the order and opened the magic circle. The huge rock slowly moved to one side, revealing a dark hole. Fabian was the first to walk down the hole. Under the dim yellow light of the torch, they walked along the stairs for about 100 meters. There was a strange sound coming from a front. After turning the corner, there was a tall basement in front of them. There was a huge dragon imprisoned in the basement. However, Hanjin and Guevara could only see a huge dragon's head. The dragon's body was deeply buried in the ground. Even its claws could not be seen. The floor was engraved with magic runes. The magicians under Dismark were very smart. Using this method to imprison the dragon was undoubtedly very effective. Moreover, there were dozens of iron chains tightly wrapped around the dragon's mouth. The dragon could not do anything other than shake its head. It could not even open its mouth, let alone breathe. "You are a dragon knight. What do you think? Do you have any thoughts?" Hanjin asked with a smile. Dragons are not trustworthy. They are not reliable. Guevara shook his head. I remember Jed's once said something similar to me. Hanjin muttered. Have you really decided? Yes. Warden, Hanjin said. Yes, yes. Fabian hurriedly came over with a smile. Do you have a way to release the dragon's blood without harming it? This. Chapter 321. After an indeterminate amount of time, Sunir finally woke up from her coma. She was greeted by a sea of blue. Sunir wasn't in a hurry to get up and observe her surroundings. Instead, she stared blankly at the unfamiliar sky. After a while, 2 drops of tears silently rolled down from the corners of her eyes. Seth was just one of Sunir's many playmates when she was young. To this day, Sunir only remembered his voice and smile. As for what Seth liked, how his martial arts training was going, and whether he had a family, Sunir knew nothing about any of that. To the Sunir of the past, Seth was just a passerby. It didn't make a difference whether he existed or not. However, it was this passerby who had sacrificed his young life for her. Only then did Sunir realize why Seth had sighed when he said he would help her enter the training environment. He already knew what he was going to face. At that thought, Sunir felt so guilty that her heart ached. It was her ignorance that had pushed Seth to his death. She should have known. How could there be no one guarding a place like this that could rapidly increase the abilities of the tribe? How could they just let anyone in? However, it was already too late. From the moment Seth rushed into the courtyard, it was already too late. Sunir lay on her back, too lazy to even move. Her mind was filled with a mess of thoughts. One moment, it was Seth's gratified smile. The next, it was Hanjin's lonely figure. And then it was the great elder's kind face. Sunir felt like her head was about to explode. She quickly sat up and shook her head hard, trying to shake the messy images out of her head. However, her mood only worsened. Sighing, Sunir slowly stood up. Things had already reached this point. There was no point in feeling guilty or regretful. She had to continue walking down this path. As soon as she stood up, her vision widened. Sunir realized that she seemed to have arrived in a strange world. Countless tall trees grew all around her, and the strange thing was that she could only see bare branches drooping to the ground. There wasn't a single leaf in sight. All the trees were the same. As an elf, Sunir didn't feel any sense of familiarity in this strange forest. All she felt was an indescribable feeling. It was like a kind of coldness. This strange world seemed to be using this silent method to welcome Sunir's appearance. Gwa! A crisp cry suddenly broke the silence in the forest. Sunir was so frightened that she shrank back and took out her bow. She looked in the direction of the sound, as if she was facing a great enemy. After a while, a small figure entered Sunir's field of vision. It was moving swiftly between the bare branches. Its movements were so fast that Sunir couldn't see its appearance clearly. In a short period of time, this little thing had already circled around Sunir countless times. Sunir felt a little dizzy, but she couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't even see its appearance clearly. She simply couldn't lock onto it. The arrow in her hand was like a decoration, and she didn't even know where to shoot. At first, Sunir was still nervous and maintained her attacking posture. However, after a while, she realized that it didn't seem to have any malicious intentions. It was only circling around on its own. Gradually, Sunir let down her guard. In any case, with this little thing's speed, if it really wanted to attack her, she wouldn't be able to block it no matter how careful she was. Just when Sunir wanted to take a few steps forward to test the waters, a grayish-white shadow suddenly shot out from the soft soil. It accurately wrapped itself around the small figure that was moving between the trees. All of this happened in a flash. By the time Sunir reacted, the little thing had already been tightly wrapped around by the grayish-white shadow. At this moment, Sunir finally got a clear look at the little thing's appearance. If it weren't for the 2 long fangs that were sticking out of its mouth, it would have looked like a miniature monkey. The thing that was wrapped around its body was something that looked like a tentacle, and it was still wriggling. Lil Thing screamed angrily. It opened its mouth and bit down. Its sharp fangs easily pierced into the tentacle that was wrapped around his body. Immediately, there was a muffled scream from the ground. The tentacle retracted back like a bolt of lightning. Sunir's gaze suddenly froze. She could clearly see that the part of the tentacle that was bitten by the little thing had turned black. After being attacked, the little thing no longer circled around. Instead, it jumped to a higher branch and stared at the ground with its pair of beady eyes, as if it was waiting for something. Not long after, another grayish-white shadow shot out from the soil without any warning. The little thing nimbly turned around and hid behind a tree trunk. Shortly after, it turned back and bit down on the tentacle that was pouncing on air. This time, the little thing didn't let go. Its foreclaws tightly hugged the tree trunk, and no matter how hard the tentacle tried to pull, the thick tree trunk was slightly deformed and creaking sounds could be heard. A muffled roar came from the ground, and the ground trembled. Following that, Sunir saw a shocking scene. Countless tentacles broke out from the ground like bamboo shoots after the rain, forming an airtight net and pouncing towards the little thing on the tree trunk. From Sunir's point of view, with such a concentrated attack, even if the little thing moved a little faster, it wouldn't be able to dodge. What she didn't expect was that the little thing had no intention of dodging at all. It was still biting on the tentacle and didn't seem to care at all about the net that was coming towards it. Just as the tentacles were about to capture the little thing, countless tiny figures suddenly appeared in the forest. It was unknown where they had been hiding, but it was as if they had appeared out of thin air. One after another, they jumped up from the trees and met the countless tentacles head-on. The tentacles in the air trembled and instantly lost their strength. It seemed that the little thing on the ground wanted to retract its tentacles, but the little things were too fast. In the blink of an eye, the tentacles were caught. A strange scene appeared. The little things far outnumbered the tentacles, and each tentacle had at least 3 or 4 figures hanging on it. These little things grabbed the tentacles and began to shuttle through the trees. A moment later, they had tied the countless tentacles into countless knots. Sunir sucked in a breath of cold air. How is this a monster? This was a group battle. Hiding, luring the enemy, capturing, all in one go without any hesitation. Things weren't over yet. The little things slid to the ground along the tentacles and began to use their claws to dig at the soft soil. It didn't take long for them to dig out a large hole. The shape of the big thing on the ground appeared in front of Sunir. It was a creature that Sunir had never seen before. The surface of its huge body was covered with spikes, and the place where the tentacles were connected was a hole the size of a wash basin. In Sunir's opinion, this should be the monster's mouth. Continuous roars came out from the hole, accompanied by a nauseating stench. However, the little things seemed to have seen a delicacy that they had been drooling for a long time. Soon, the roars were mixed with a lot of pain. In the end, the monster couldn't even make a sound. It could only let the little things bite and tear at its body. In some places, white bones could be seen. When the little things had eaten their fill and dispersed in satisfaction, only a huge skeleton was left. It had been gnawed until there wasn't even a trace of meat left. There were also countless tentacles tied to the trees. It seemed that the tentacles of this monster didn't taste good. Otherwise, the little things wouldn't have let it go. Sunir looked at the skeleton on the ground, and a trace of fear rose in her heart. She asked herself, if these little things swarmed her, she wouldn't be able to defend herself. In this situation, the Morrisons had a much higher chance of survival than her. Thinking of this, Sunir was a little puzzled. How did the people who passed the trial deal with these little things that came and went like the wind? Of course, Sunir didn't know that these little monkey-like things could be considered the most difficult creatures to deal with in the temple. In the past, these little things wouldn't appear near the entrance. Even the elves who passed the trial and successfully picked the 7-colored Achira flower didn't have the chance to see them. However, in the past few days, something strange happened in the depths of this world. It forced these little things to leave their place of residence and wander outside, resulting in the scene in front of Sunir. However, What made Sunir feel strange was that these little things didn't attack her. She couldn't understand. Catching Sunir was obviously much easier than catching that big guy, full of tentacles. At this time, Sunir's eyes focused on the ground. A few meters in front of her, there were a few little insects swimming around. It didn't seem like there was anything wrong, but the elves' observation skills were second to none on the continent. In addition, Sunir was more attentive, so she quickly discovered the abnormality. These little insects tried their best to get close to Sunir, but they were always blocked by an invisible barrier. They would always be bounced back after entering a certain range. Sunir walked around the white whirlpool and discovered that no creatures could enter within a 5-meter radius of the whirlpool. She suddenly realized why these little things didn't attack her. It seemed like they already knew that they couldn't get close to this place. However, this discovery didn't have much of an effect on Sunir. She couldn't just stay in this circle forever, right? Although she didn't come to the temple solely for the trial, Sunir, who was always eager to excel, would never hide here. There were only 2 paths left in front of her. One was to leave and explore the unknown world. The danger was self-evident. If she encountered those little things, Sunir could only run away, or she could jump into the whirlpool and return to the real world. However, if she did that, what was the point of Seth's sacrifice? Sunir was in a dilemma. When the sky was just beginning to brighten, Sunir finally made up her mind. After a whole night of careful observation, Sunir discovered that those scary little things didn't appear again. Moreover, the surroundings were always quiet. There were no signs of other creatures moving around. How could there be a lack of life in the forest? Sunir thought that there were only 2 answers. One was that it could be seen from the surface. This forest was too strange. At least, Sunir had never seen a tree without a single leaf. Therefore, it wasn't impossible for there to be fewer creatures here. The other reason should have something to do with the little creatures. Even the monsters hiding underground had to be lured out and eaten, so the creatures on the surface would have a hard time escaping from their claws. If it was the second reason, then there was no food here. Those little things wouldn't stay any longer. It was just like locusts in the real world. After eating a piece of land, they would cover the sky and fly to the next piece of land. Stepping on the morning dew, Sunir carefully walked through the forest. Her footsteps were extremely light, afraid that she would wake up any dormant monsters. However, along the way, she didn't even see the shadow of an animal. There were only bones everywhere. Sunir's heart was filled with fear. It seemed that those little things had already eaten all the animals nearby. Fortunately, she didn't wander around when she woke up. Otherwise, there would be a nameless skeleton here. Sunir didn't know how long she had been walking. She had already gotten used to the sight of the bones, instead of being frightened at the beginning. He was also used to the deathly silence around him, and all he could hear was the faint sound of his own footsteps. Sunir actually had an illusion that she would continue walking like this. As for the meaning of this, Sunir didn't want to think about it. She just kept walking in this endless forest. There was no goal, no destination. Danger always came when one wasn't paying attention. Just as Sunir passed by a tree that didn't seem to have any abnormalities, one of the branches on the tree suddenly came to life. With a whoosh, it shot towards Sunir. Caught off guard, Sunir only had time to raise the bough in her hand to block it. At the same time, her body dodged to the side. The thing hit the bowstring and screamed in pain before retreating back to the tree. Sunir finally saw that it was a snake-like creature. Its pea-sized pupils flashed with a terrifying green light. The color of its body blended together with the tree trunk. At first glance, it looked like the tree trunk had grown 2 eyes. Although she didn't know if this thing was poisonous, Sunir didn't want to be bitten. She quickly retreated and pulled the distance between them. At the same time, she knocked her bow and shot an arrow in the middle of the 2 green lights. At such a close distance, the snake-like creature didn't even have time to react before it was nailed to the tree. The creature was dead, but Sunir wasn't happy at all. The fact that these snakes were able to avoid the claws of those small creatures proved that they were very hard to find. In fact, if it wasn't for the 2 green lights, Sunir wouldn't have been able to tell which was the tree trunk and which was the snake. Sunir looked at the densely packed trees around her and felt a headache coming on. Every tree could have the existence of these snakes. These hidden enemies were much more terrifying than the visible beasts. Just the psychological pressure alone wasn't something an ordinary person could withstand. Although Sunir had experienced countless fierce battles, she was still helpless in the face of this kind of untraceable attack. She could only maintain a high degree of vigilance at all times. As she walked and killed, Sunir killed at least 10 of these strange snakes. She also gained a few more wounds on her body. Fortunately, these snakes weren't poisonous. Among her peers, Sunir could be considered one of the best. At the very least, she had participated in more large-scale battles than others. The battle experience she had accumulated gave her a sharp intuition. She was always able to avoid a fatal sneak attack in the nick of time and kill her opponent with the least cost. The sky was already dark. In the forest, Sunir should have cleared out a safe place to spend the night. However, Sunir didn't do that. It was as if she had turned into a machine. She kept moving forward, getting ambushed, dodging, and counterattacking. Sometimes, Sunir didn't even bother to dodge. It was just another wound on her body. She didn't care at all. Sunir focused all her energy on the incoming danger. Hanjin, the first elder, and even the dead Seth seemed to have been forgotten by her. This was what Sunir wanted. She wanted to immerse herself in the battle and forget everything that worried her. Running away was never the best way to solve problems, but Sunir couldn't think of a better way. Her mind was almost completely blank. Sunir didn't even notice that the number of strange snakes attacking her was decreasing. Animals had a certain level of intelligence. Sunir didn't know how many strange snakes she had killed along the way. Her entire body was stained with blood. Some of it was hers, but most of it was from the strange snakes. Now, when the strange snakes saw Sunir, it didn't even have time to hide. Other than a few brave ones who weren't afraid of death, the rest saw Sunir coming from afar and hurriedly fled to trees further away. Just by looking at Sunir's ruthlessness, if anyone else was here, they would have the misconception that Sunir was here to kill all the strange snakes. Finally, Sunir stopped. It wasn't because she was tired, but because she had entered a state of selflessness. She didn't know what fatigue was at all. She just mechanically repeated the two actions of moving forward and killing. She stopped because a small lake appeared in front of her, blocking her path. The clear and bright lake water was like a bright moon embedded in the forest. Not only did it illuminate Sunir's face, but also soothe the indescribable anger in her heart. The elves were a race that loved nature the most. Although the beauty of the environment wouldn't affect their fighting strength, it would definitely affect their mood. The reason why Sunir's hands were stained with blood all the way here wasn't unrelated to the barren forest around her. One had to know that the elves were very elegant, even in battle. Not to mention a female elf like Sunir. Even the male elves rarely killed so unscrupulously and didn't care about the bloodstains on their bodies. When she saw the clear lake, the ruthlessness in Sunir's heart disappeared in an instant. What followed was a thick sense of fatigue. Even if Hanjin killed from dawn to dusk, his vital energy would have been depleted long ago. Sunir had completely relied on the resentment in her heart to hold on until now. Sunir just casually laid down on the grass, smelling the slightly damp fragrance of the soil. Her heart was unprecedentedly peaceful, and she really wanted to fall asleep just like that. However, the large and small wounds on her body constantly hurt, making it impossible for her to sleep. Sunir shook her head in annoyance, trying to drive away the pain. In the end, it didn't help. The clearer her mind was, the more intense the pain was. Furthermore, she hid in the temple in a panic and didn't have time to make any preparations. There were no potions, no food, no drinking water, and the dried blood on her body made her feel extremely uncomfortable. Helpless, she could only drag her tired body up and walk toward the lake. This was a world without people, so Sunir wasn't afraid of being peeked at. She relaxed and slowly took off her clothes, bathing her white, jade-like body in the watery moonlight. The clear and transparent lake water sprinkled on her body. That kind of refreshing feeling and the bone-piercing pain from her wounds attacked at the same time. She couldn't describe what kind of feeling it was. The lake water was like ice, and the pain was like fire. Under the intertwining of ice and fire, Sunir faintly felt a bit satisfied. She even deliberately sprinkled the lake water on her wounds. After a while, Sunir suddenly stopped. She stared blankly at the wounds on her body that had been washed white by the lake water. Since when did her heart become so hard? She remembered that when she was young, even if it was just a small cut, she would still cry. This wasn't bad, Sunir thought to herself. She wasn't even afraid of death. So what else could she be afraid of? A thought suddenly flashed through Sunir's mind. If she died here, would anyone feel sad? Raphael? He would probably be very sad, right? Thinking of Raphael's mischievous smile, Sunir's heart felt warm. Lying on her back in the lake, she let the gentle water carry her body on the surface of the lake. At this moment, Sunir's mind was abnormally clear. Did the great elder hate Hanjin? No, they didn't even meet. If Hanjin was the one with the blood of God, she believed that the great elder wouldn't wait to invite Hanjin to Wild Willow City. Sunir could understand the great elder's feelings. The fairy myth that had been passed down for thousands of years was about to become a reality. At this critical moment, whoever dared to stop it would be the enemy of the entire fairy race. The marriage between her and Prudence was not only the great elder's wish, but also the wish of the entire fairy race. However, Sunir felt wronged. Why didn't anyone ask her? Could it be that only by marrying Prudence could the fairy race rise? Why couldn't those people see Hanjin's potential and the people standing by Hanjin's side? Sunir firmly believed that as long as Hanjin was given enough time, he would definitely become a legend on the continent. Was there anyone more outstanding than Hanjin? In just a few years, he had gone from a small noble to a powerhouse who dominated a region. This kind of miraculous rise might happen in the future, but looking at the history of the continent, until now, Hanjin was the only one who had done it. What should I do? Sunir silently asked herself. Family or lover? Which was more important? Which was more important? To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 322. Hanjin had a lot of talents under his command. Lang Ning, the commander of Riptide, and Alexander, the commander of the mountain soldiers, were both outstanding generals. As for Guevara, Jedis, and Majordomo Gale, they were all excellent in both military and political management. There were only a few people on the continent who could surpass them. Moreover, Hanjin's current sphere of influence was not large. He had only occupied one city. With these 5 people in charge, the Holy Crown City quickly became stable. Because of the chaotic situation, all the cities on the continent had adopted a pan-military management method. The military power was much higher than the political power. Lang Ning had long been loyal to Hanjin, and Alexander was rescued by Hanjin, so his loyalty was even higher than that of Lang Ning. The 3 people in the think tank headed by Guevara did not hold any actual positions in the military. Although they had a high status, their power was limited because of this. As the saying goes, whether others would listen to them depended on their reputation, and their reputation was determined by Hanjin's attitude. If Hanjin expressed his dislike for someone, that person would immediately be isolated by everyone. It was a delicate balance. Hanjin was still willing to be a hands-off boss. Since he had successfully occupied the Holy Crown City, he had barely interfered in military and political affairs. 2 days ago, he had only issued an order to appoint Yelena as the Legion commander of the Magic Legion, and Hogan and Kane as the Vice Legion commanders. At the same time, they would also be the Dean of the Magic Academy. In fact, Hanjin also wanted to let Sasu take an important position in the Magic Legion. However, Sasu's strength was not enough to convince the public. He also knew that although Sassu appeared to be easygoing, he also had his own pride. If he forced it, not only would it put Sassu in a difficult position, but it would also hurt Sassu's self-esteem. Therefore, he could only give up on this idea. However, Han Jin still had to attend the regular meeting every 3 days. There were many people in the meeting. The 3 people in the think tank were Lang Ning and Alexander representing the army, Yelena, Kane, and Hogan representing the Magic Legion, Morrison's, Leger, Winston, Saxon, Chipango, Hollister, and so on. These people were the core of the whole group. Han Jin never liked to talk nonsense, nor did he like to listen to nonsense. Therefore, Lang Ning, who was the first to speak, went straight to the point without any pretense or flattery. To the west of the Holy Crown City, the other cities that were originally under the control of the Holy Crown City had almost all fallen. The scouts reported that almost all of those cities had their own ancient trees of life. The cities were surrounded by green vegetation, and even under the test of the harsh winter, they were still full of vitality. Lang Ning had already sent messengers to the cities to the east of the Holy Crown City, and they were willing to pledge their loyalty to Han Jin. At the same time, Lang Ning made his own request. Because the Silver Pegasus Legion of the Elves had an absolute advantage in speed, the scouts had suffered a great loss. Out of 100 of them, only a dozen could come back alive. Therefore, Lang Ning requested to stop the scouts immediately or think of other ways. Every city has an ancient tree of life. Lang Ning had just finished his words when Guevara frowned and asked, "Are your people right?" "It can't be wrong," Ronning replied in a solemn tone. "Impossible." Majordomo Gale shook his head. His attitude was the same as Guevara's. They both could not believe it. If the ancient tree of life could be planted at will, this continent would have long been ruled by the elves. "I know the reason," the paladin knight Adonis suddenly said. Ever since the conflict between Adonis and Han Jin, those who were close to Han Jin were more or less disgusted with the paladin knight, which put Jeds in a very awkward situation. Moreover, the rift between the two sides was getting deeper and wider. Whether or not he could make up for it in time depended on his own attitude. It could also be said that his choice would determine the future of the Holy See. With great responsibility came great pressure. Everyone's eyes fell on Adonis, but Adonis was looking at Jeds. After a while, he slowly said, "There's an elven elder called Blanche who brought her tribe to Wild Willow City. They have a moon spring." "Moon spring?" No wonder. Guevara was suddenly enlightened. "Blanche?" Han Jin was stunned. "She also came from the southwest like you?" "Yes." Adonis nodded. "You know her?" Yelena asked. "Yes, she's a comrade who fought together." Han Jin smiled. "I know that the moon spring can make the seeds of life sprout quickly, but I don't understand. What's in it for the elves?" Majordomo Gale pondered and said, "Although their military strength is several times greater than ours, they don't have an advantage in other aspects. They should have gathered their forces together, but they took the initiative to divide their forces. This is simply courting death?" Guevara smiled and said, "Maybe it's because they need to use facts to boost their morale. After all, the elves have never expanded so quickly for thousands of years. In just 10 days, they have occupied 2.5 provinces, which is thousands of miles of land. And the elves have a habit. Without the ancient tree of life, they don't dare to believe that the land belongs to them." Jeds interrupted. "But didn't they think about it? They can't defend it at all." Lang Ning said, "I have an explanation." Han Jin said faintly, "The elves think that the enemy they are facing is Dismark, not us." "That makes sense." Majordomo Gale paused and smiled. "Facing a coward, of course they don't have to worry about anything. But we can't launch a counterattack quickly." Lang Ning said, "We just incorporated Dismark's army, so the morale are a bit unstable. I need at least 2 months. Kane, what about your Magic Legion?" "It's easier for us here than it is for you, because most of the mages are smart people." Kane smiled. "Plus, we now have a Magister Legion commander, a Magister." Everyone laughed kindly. Yelena blushed and waved her hand. "Actually, I don't care about anything. I'm relying on Kane and Hogan." In fact, Yelena's current achievements had already surpassed her father, Grand Duke Solomon. She was both the commander of the Magic Legion and the dean of the Magic Academy. Her position was high and glorious. When Solomon was Yelena's age, he was only a Grand Mage. Although he was respected, he didn't have much power. Don't count me in. Hogan is the one who has it the hardest. I'm just a troublemaker. Kane smiled. Hogan's face was also red, but Yelena's was shy, while Hogan's was excited. This was a meeting of the highest level, and his name was mentioned repeatedly. If he was in Cold Shadow City, how could he be qualified? We don't even need to mobilize an army, Guevara said slowly. One god of war is enough. God of war? Lang Ning was stunned. Yes, Hallman, the president of the Chamber of Commerce in isolated Cliff City, sent us more than 100 magic crystal cannons. They sent many high-grade mercenaries to escort them and carefully avoided the territory of the elves. It's winter now, and the elves only like to hide in the ancient tree of life. They won't go into the ice and snow easily. If there are no accidents, they'll arrive in a few days. We'll take down all the magic crystal cannons in the Holy Crown City and install them on the God of War. More than 600 magic crystal cannons. Take down all the magic crystal cannons in the Holy Crown City? Then what about here? Lang Ning asked hurriedly. I'm not Dismark, Guevara said softly. I only like to attack, not defend. But Lang Ning still wanted to say something. That's it. Han Jin interrupted. The magic crystal cannons are the same no matter where they are installed. Lang Ning, as long as you change your mind slightly, you'll be able to accept it. Although Han Jin didn't know much about military affairs, he was a modern man. Installing the cannons in a fixed place was a practice in the age of great navigation. In modern warfare, almost all cannons could be moved. Therefore, he agreed with Guevara's proposal. Hearing Han Jin's words, Lang Ning no longer objected. After all, a shopkeeper had absolute authority even if he didn't do anything himself. Hogan, Han Jin said. Yes. Hogan hurriedly stood up. Han Jin gestured for Hogan to sit down. More than 600 magic crystal cannons. Can the God of War fit them all? Hogan thought for a moment. Then we can only remove the original cannons and think of another way to fix them. Okay, I'll leave it to you. No problem. Don't worry, Master. Hogan immediately straightened his chest. There's one more thing, Lang Ning said. His gaze fell on Morrison's. Before we entered the Abyss world, I had already sent people to Black Raven City to pick up Miss Chi Li and Miss Sylvia, but there's been no news of them. Elves shouldn't make things difficult for a few women, right? Sasu said. Probably not. Lang Ning hesitated. At this time, no matter how he answered, it would be useless and wouldn't change anything. He could only choose to comfort them. Morrison's looked a little uneasy. On one hand, it was because he was worried. On the other hand, it was because this was his personal matter. It was inappropriate to talk about it in such a formal meeting. Of course, he was also very grateful that Lang Ning valued him so much. If they weren't stopped, where should they be now? Han Jin asked. They should be there soon, Lang Ning said. Anyway, I don't have anything else to do these days. I'll go out and look for them, Han Jin said. Raphael, this is somewhat inappropriate. Morrison's university was anxious. Although he and Han Jin had known each other for a long time, it could be said that he had watched Han Jin grow up from the beginning to the end, but he had always been careless and had also noticed the growing gap between the two of them. After all, Han Jin was the head of the entire group. It was very inappropriate for him to personally go out and look for two insignificant people. Inappropriate? Chile and Sylvia are both my friends. Tell me, what's inappropriate about it? Han Jin was really angry. His brows were tightly knitted together. Morrison's, don't worry. Guevara hurriedly tried to smooth things over. Let Raphael go find them. It's more effective than us sending an army. They'll be fine. Next, let's talk about Depew City. Major Domo Gale and Guevara cooperated well. As soon as Guevara finished smoothing things over, Major Domo Gale changed the topic. We should send someone to form an alliance with Depew City. I think that Lord Maleth of Depew City will not refuse, but we have to be prepared. This is only a temporary alliance. That's right. Guevara said, "The day we defeat the elves might be the day Lord Maleth betrays the Alliance. Being sandwiched between us and Che-Sam, Lord Maleth's situation is indeed very confusing." Jeds laughed. "But how do you know that Maleth will definitely join Che-Sam? Joining us is also a good choice. That's why I said maybe." Guevara also laughed. This was the fundamental difference between Guevara and the younger generation like Lang Ning and Alan Samret. Lang Ning believed that the elves were their biggest enemy, so he racked his brains for a solution. Guevara and the others, on the other hand, were not worried about the elves. They talked and laughed about the future as if it was nothing. Their smiles and words gave the people around them a great sense of confidence. It was as if they could destroy the elves with a single breath. Many people knew that they had to look down on the enemy strategically, but whether they could do it or not was another matter. Guevara and the others not only did they do it, but they did it very naturally, without any trace of deliberate intention. They also influenced the mood of the young people around them, making them feel relaxed and think that the elves were nothing special. Han Jin's wings were fully developed. With the help of the 3 think tanks, he already had the qualifications and strength to soar up to 90,000 miles. "Dominique, what do you think?" Major Domo Gale's gaze fell on Dominique. Because Dominique's body was too big, it was too eye-catching to sit in the inner circle. She could only sit in the outermost circle with Chipango, Hal Lister, and the others. She did not expect Major Domo Gale to ask her. She was stunned for a while before she replied, "I think Lord Maleth has a higher chance of joining us." "Why?" Han Jin asked. Because Che-Sam. Dominique did not know how to say it. Because Cheesam's brain is not normal? Guevara laughed. Everyone laughed. A guy who had been married thousands of times and held thousands of funerals. It would be strange to say that he was normal. Dominique also laughed, then nodded vigorously. "I agree with Dominique." Guevara said, "I also agree, but we can't wait for Lord Maleth to join us. So, Lord Raphael, we should do something, but there are some things that we can't do." Major Domo Gale's gaze fell on Han Jin. "You should understand what I mean, right? You mean those nobles?" Han Jin said in a playful tone. "Yes." Major Domo Gale's expression was very serious, which was a sharp contrast to Han Jin's. On the issue of how to deal with the original nobles in the Holy Crown City, Han Jin and the 3-man think tank had different opinions. Han Jin wanted to uproot them and let all the people in the Holy Crown City feel a new atmosphere, while Guevara and the others thought that they should adopt a gentle approach and not make a big fuss. To their relief, Han Jin only put forward his own ideas, but did not force his subordinates to do as he said. Instead, he left the decision-making power to the 3-man think tank. However, the more Han Jin delegated power, the more the 3-man think tank could not be careless. They had been trying to persuade Han Jin and let Han Jin truly understand their concerns. "Raphael, if we touch the nobles in the Holy Crown City, what will the nobles in the Depew City think?" Guevara said slowly, "Dominique is right. Lord Maleth should be more inclined to us, but if we really do it, he will not hesitate to side with Che-Sam. Unfair doesn't mean unreasonable." Jedis said softly, "Lord Raphael, you have been to the southwest. Do you know why those lords are so determined to oppose Nicholas? They would rather die than surrender. It is because every time Nicholas occupies a city, he will completely cut off the nobles' roots. In fact, I also think that the world should be changed, but not now. We have to wait until we can control all the situation, then we can try. Nicholas is changing and walking at the same time. I can attest to how dangerous and difficult his road is. If we want to catch up with him, we can't change anything now." Speaking of this, Jedis sighed. He suddenly realized that he and Nicholas had the same goal, but the road they chose was different. Nicholas' way was too cruel and bloody, which he did not like. The so-called different roads lead to the same destination could be used to describe him and Nicholas. However, because of their different paths, they were bound to become mortal enemies. Han Jin was silent for a long time, then slowly nodded. I understand. I will leave this matter to you. I have no objection. Guevara and the others looked at each other and breathed a sigh of relief. Lord Raphael, are you going to find Chile and Sylvia? Major Domo Gale asked. When are you leaving? In fact, Major Domo Gale thought that it was completely unnecessary for Han Jin to find them himself, but he could not object. Otherwise, he would offend many people for no reason. At the very least, he would offend all the younger generation, including Han Jin himself. Tomorrow. Why? I suggest that you don't go too far. After all, that is the territory of the elves. There won't be a problem. Han Jin smiled. The fact that isolated Cliff City could send over hundreds of magic crystal cannons proves that there are too many loopholes in the elves' defense. They have just gained a foothold, haven't they? Let Yelena accompany you, Major Domo Gale said calmly. If they encounter any danger, it will be difficult for you to take care of them. With Yelena's help, it will be much easier. Don't worry, the elves don't have the ability to fly. Yelena will definitely be able to protect herself. That is good. Han Jin nodded. It seems that I need to prepare first. Chapter 323. Han Jin sat quietly in his chair with his eyes slightly closed, deep in thought. Because he rarely interfered with military and political affairs, he had more time than others. Every day, apart from practicing, he would sit in his main seat and be lost in thought. Whenever this happened, the crew on the God of War would always be alert and avoid talking to each other as much as possible. Even if they had to talk, they would hide in the cabin. Even when they walked, they would be careful not to disturb Han Jin. Hogan carefully calculated at the side of the ship. Although the hull of the God of War was huge, it was still difficult to accommodate more than 600 magic crystal cannons. Moreover, it wasn't as simple as just placing the magic crystal cannons on the ship. Once a battle broke out, they had to ensure that all the magic crystal cannons could fire freely. The distance between the magic crystal cannons couldn't be too close. The violent vibration of the cannon muzzle and the conflict of the magic crystal attributes could have unpredictable effects. It was difficult for Hogan. Yelena and Kane did not have much experience in management, so he was responsible for the daily affairs of the Magic Legion and the Magic Academy. Now, Han Jin had handed over the installation of the magic crystal cannons to him. The pressure was too great, and the burden was too heavy. However, Han Jin did not have any other candidates. Hogan's attainments in alchemy were better than Yelena and Kane's. He was older and more experienced than Yelena and Kane. Everything was just starting out, so he could not give anyone a trial. He had to do it well. As the saying goes, capable people do more work, so he could only trouble Hogan. Of course, Jedis was also a good candidate, but Han Jin could not hand over the Magic Academy and the Magic Legion to Jedis. Although Han Jin did not have the experience of managing or ruling, he understood what balance was. Cultivation also required the balance of yin and yang and the 5 elements. The addition of the 3 Saint Knight and the priest group had already made Jedi's strength above Guevara and Major Domo Gale. If he handed over the Magic Legion and the Magic Academy, once he left the Holy Crown City, no one would be able to restrain Jedis. It wasn't that Han Jin was guarding against Jeds. If he had to guard against him, it would be to guard against the smallest of mistakes. He didn't want to go that far, and he also believed that Jeds didn't want to go that far either. Little Gold Bolt was creeping beside Han Jin listlessly. Not only it, but almost all the Thunderbirds were a little depressed because Han Jin would not allow them to fly off the God of War. After all, the Thunderbirds were magical beasts. Although each of them had been transformed by Han Jin, their intelligence was still limited. A few days ago, they went out for a walk, and as a result, the Holy Crown City was in a mess. At that time, Han Jin happened to be not there, and Harley was in the soul-devouring orb, so no one could control them. As a result, they started a massacre in the Holy Crown City. Fortunately, they would not attack humans and horses for no reason, but the chickens, ducks, geese, and dogs in the city all suffered. People were feeding the chickens with breadcrumbs when suddenly lightning fell from the sky blowing up big holes in the ground, and even crushing the chicken nests and dog nests into powder. Then, a giant bird taller than a human fell from the sky, picked up the bloody prey, and flew into the sky proudly. How could ordinary people see such a thing? Some even fainted. The weaker ones swallowed their teeth and pretended that nothing had happened. Those who felt that they had some background went to the street to find the patrols. The patrols came, but what could they do? Not to mention them, even the warriors and magicians of the Riptide and the Magic Legion, who dared to attack those Thunderbirds. Everyone knew that those Thunderbirds were the treasures of Lord Raphael. In the end, they disturbed Yelena, who was meditating, and then the raging Thunderbirds were controlled. Otherwise, it was estimated that all the chickens, ducks, geese, and dogs in the city would have been slaughtered. When Han Jin heard the news, he was so angry that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was impossible to reason with them. Even little gold lightning couldn't understand, let alone the other Thunderbirds. In the end, Han Jin could only issue a simple order. Except for eating, all the Thunderbirds could only stay there and not move. After a few days, the Thunderbirds' mental state naturally became more and more sluggish. This was even more unfortunate than the beasts in the zoo. In the zoo, at least they could move around in cages, but the Thunderbirds could only stand there blankly. If there was an animal protection association in this world, they might come to Han Jin to protest if they had the guts. Of course, this was only temporary. Once Harley was free, he would be able to control the Thunderbirds. After an unknown amount of time, Stillberg and Miriam came out one after another. Ever since Han Jin admitted their relationship, Stillberg and Miriam's relationship became closer and closer, and they no longer hid it. Seeing Han Jin sitting there deep in thought, Stillberg was stunned for a moment. He hurriedly turned around and raised his index finger at Miriam, indicating that she should not speak. Then, Stillberg carefully walked behind Han Jin and reached out his hand to touch the cup on the table. If the water inside was cold, he was prepared to change it. However, Han Jin had already noticed Stillberg. When Stillberg's hand touched the cup, he suddenly said, "Stillberg, have you been training diligently these past few days?" Stillberg was shocked and hurriedly said, "Young master, how could I dare delay? I can already feel the power you speak of." "What power?" Miriam asked curiously from behind. She had never heard Stillberg mention it before. "Go away. Don't interrupt when a man is talking." Stillberg glared at her. Miriam, however, was not afraid at all. She stuck out her nose and glared back at Stillberg without backing down. However, she did not say anything else. After the nightmarish incident, she had become very autistic for a period of time and did not speak to anyone. However, ever since she had met Stillberg, the knot in her heart had been untangled bit by bit, and she had gradually regained her lively personality. "Huh?" Han Jin laughed. "You've got some guts. Aren't you afraid that Miriam will come after you when we get back? I'll listen to her on small matters, but she'll listen to me on big matters." Stillberg chuckled. Since he had already put on an act, there was no harm in putting on an act until the end. He waved his hand and said casually, "Miriam, go back first. Don't disturb me and the young master." Miriam was so angry that her face turned red, and she stomped her foot angrily. However, it was just as Stillberg had said. The matters between the two of them were separate matters, but when it came to outsiders, Miriam would always be very obedient. At the very least, she gave Stillberg a lot of face. She did not talk back or retort. After glaring at Stillberg for a moment, she turned around and walked away. "All right, if you continue to cause trouble, you'll be the one to suffer," Han Jin said with a smile. "Miriam, come back." Han Jin's words were far more effective than Stillberg's. She immediately turned around and looked at Stillberg with a smile. She walked back quickly. "Miriam, even though Stillberg has always called me young master, in my heart, I've always thought of him as my younger brother. You're his wife, so of course you're my family as well. There's nothing to worry about between the two of us," Han Jin said slowly. "I know," Miriam replied softly. She then stood behind Han Jin and used her hands to gently massage Han Jin's shoulders. "I've heard him say that your lives back then were very, very difficult. When she said that, Miriam's eyes turned red. When she heard Stillberg's story, she could not believe that the mighty Lord Raphael had such a tragic past. Young master, we haven't even gotten married yet. Stillberg's eyes also turned red. You've reminded me. Hanji nodded. At that time, I said that I wanted to organize your wedding, but then I went to the abyss world and delayed your plans. How about this, Hogan? Yes, master. Hearing Hanjin calling for him, Hogan hurriedly stood up and walked over with large strides. Hanjin opened his mouth but swallowed the words he wanted to say. He had wanted to let Hogan handle the wedding matters, but when he saw Hogan's bloodshot eyes and the paper filled with numbers in his hands, he really could not bring himself to say it. He had made Hogan his slave purely out of the malice of humiliating him. He had never thought that Hogan would be so useful. In isolated Cliff City, he had exchanged alchemy with Yelena and the others, but that was not an exchange. He had been teaching Yelena and Cain. Later, when he had built the God of War, and now, when he was managing the Magic Legion and the Magic Academy, Hogan had always been the busiest and most hardworking one out of all of them. Although Hogan had not reached the point where he would give his all until he died, he was almost there. It was really almost there. Although Hogan's conduct was somewhat unbearable, and what made Hanjin dislike him was that he could not walk away when he saw beautiful women. He would always try to find a way to get them. Among Yalan Samrat's batch of slaves, many of them had been ruined by Hogan. However, no one was perfect. While controlling Hogan to not make any mistakes, he should also give him some benefits. Forget it. Hanjin waved his hand. Hogan stared blankly at Hanjin. He was confused. Stillberg, how many spirit recovery magic scrolls can you make in a day? Hanjin asked. In fact, spirit recovery magic scrolls were recuperation talismans. Compared to spirit refreshment talismans, if the former was tea, the latter was a harmless stimulant. On the other hand, recuperation talismans could prolong one's life. Although their effectiveness was far inferior to spirit refreshment talismans, they had their own advantages. I can make about 20 scrolls, Stillberg replied. From today onwards, give Hogan 5 spirit recovery magic scrolls every day. Yes, young master. Stillberg nodded. No matter what others thought of Hogan, he had a good impression of Hogan. This was normal. With Hogan's intelligence, of course, he would try his best to please Hanjin's only servant. Master, this is not good. What about Master Guevara? Hogan seemed very surprised. Under Hanjin's insistence, Guevara had to use some of Stillberg's magic scrolls every day. How could he dare to fight with Guevara? It's fine. I can make quite a few scrolls a day now. It's enough to go around, Stillberg said with a smile. Miriam's face was filled with pride. She had accepted Stillberg because Stillberg was only Hanjin's servant. His status was similar to hers, and he was also young. He was not as scary, cruel, capricious, and unpredictable as the big shots. But now that the two of them were together, which wife would not want her husband to become an indomitable figure? Thus, Miriam had long since changed her mind. The more useful Stillberg was, and the more valued he was, the prouder and happier she was. Master, Hogan still did not dare to accept it. Go do what you need to do. Hanjin waved his hand. Remember to rest more in the future. There are endless things to do. Don't work too hard. Hogan was stunned. Hanjin had suddenly treated him so well today, which made him feel flattered. But the surprise was far greater than the former. He even forgot to thank Hanjin, and just left in a daze as Hanjin gestured. Stillberg, you must work hard in the future. Do you understand? Hanjin said softly. Young master, I have always worked hard. Stillberg replied as he nodded vigorously. Harley can't stay here forever. He has to follow me. Hanjin paused. When your strength has accumulated to a certain level, the God of War will be handed over to you. What? Stillberg was even more shocked than Hogan, and he cried out in disbelief. Miriam was also stunned. She had lived here for a long time, and she knew what the God of War meant. Could it be that Hanjin was going to let Stillberg be the captain of the God of War? Miriam lost her composure, and her small hands even grabbed Hanjin's shoulders tightly. twisting his clothes into a ball. It was only when Han Jin patted her hands that she snapped out of her daze. "Young master, can I do it?" Stillberg asked with difficulty. "If I say you can do it, then you can," Han Jin replied calmly. "But you have to work hard. At least, you can't embarrass me." All right, there's nothing to worry about. I can let Harley accompany you for a while. Once you are completely familiar with him, I will take him away." Han Jin smiled. "Regarding the wedding, I can only leave it to Guevara. I have to go out tomorrow. When I return, the preparations should be more or less complete." "Young master, I don't want to get married now," Stillberg stuttered. "Why?" Han Jin was stunned. Miriam's face turned pale, and she stared blankly at Stillberg. "Young master, you haven't. How could I?" The news just now had caused him to panic. Otherwise, he would have known the pain in Han Jin's heart, and he would not have touched it so easily. Miriam's heart finally calmed down, but she was immediately filled with disappointment. In her panic, she could not care less and kicked Stillberg's calf. Han Jin became silent. After all, an injury was an injury, and it would not change because of his growth. However, he did not feel any pain. He only felt that his heart was heavy and numb. "Young master, I didn't do it on purpose," Stillberg said timidly. You don't have to care about my business." Han Jin smiled, then shook his head. Just as Stillberg did not know what to say, Guevara's head popped out from the gangway and jumped onto the deck. "You're here." Stillberg hurriedly changed the topic and greeted Guevara. "Kid, what's wrong? You don't look too good. Did you get scolded?" Guevara laughed. Before his injury healed, Stillberg had always been taking care of him. If he had to find someone close to him, it would be Han Jin or Stillberg. No, Stillberg stammered. "We're talking about Stillberg's marriage." Han Jin smiled. "Marriage? Great." Guevara was overjoyed. He did not know why, but many elders like to attend the weddings of the younger generation, and Guevara was one of them. "I have to go out tomorrow, so I can only leave this matter to you," Han Jin said. "No problem." Guevara looked at Stillberg and Miriam. He was really happy for the younger generation. At that moment, the slave warriors on the ship carried large boxes from the side of the ship and placed them neatly on the deck. "What is that?" Han Jin asked. "What you need." Guevara smiled. "Dragon's blood." Han Jin stood up and walked over. He casually opened one of the boxes and saw dozens of glass bottles inside. Each bottle was filled with bright red blood. There were about a few hundred bottles in the boxes. So much. Han Jin frowned slightly. Can that dragon take it? He did not want to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. He had this thought for a long time, but he did not have the strength to put it into action. Now that Dismark had given him a dragon for free, of course he would cherish it. "Don't tell me you want to raise the dragon forever," Guevara said softly. "That's impossible." "Why?" Han Jin asked. "Did you forget? The dragon has the same intelligence as us, or even more than us," Guevara said slowly. "Think about it from another angle. If you were captured and someone would come to bleed you every once in a while and treat you like an animal, what would you want to do the most?" "Die." "It's the same for the dragon," Guevara said. "This time, I purposely went over to observe for a while. That giant dragon's condition is not good. Moreover, we can't feed it at all. Although a giant dragon can live for a long time without eating or drinking, that's because it's sleeping. On the other hand, we constantly bleed it. How long do you think it can live?" "Of course." Han Jin was silent for a moment. "How long do you think it can live?" "I think it can still be used 4 or 5 times, Guevara said. "Then we will have to harvest the magic crystals." 4 or 5 times? That should be enough." Han Jin nodded. "This is too much of a joke. You can't fool people like this. Yesterday, I finally managed to get a sister to watch the lights with me. While we were watching, someone called me and said that the group was arguing. He said that I updated it wrongly. At that time, he was using his phone to go online and could not see what was going on. He asked me to go back immediately. I did not believe him at that time because after I made the mistake, I was very careful and always checked it a few times before I sent it. But a few minutes later, another call came and said that I was wrong. At that time, I was really anxious. The place where we were watching the lights was cordoned off and traffic was not allowed. I ran all the way down the street and found a taxi to go home. When I got home, what did I do wrong? Then I called my sister to apologize. At that time, I was so anxious that I left her there. In the end, she did not pick up my call. This Lantern Festival is too depressing. Now you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.